My sister watched me collapse in a blinding sandstorm and simply walked away. She left me bleeding on the jagged red rocks of Sedona, taking my only source of water and my emergency radio. The very next morning, she strolled into my hospital room wearing pristine designer clothes, sipping an iced matcha latte, and casually asked the doctor how I was doing. The doctor looked her dead in the eye and delivered a single sentence that made my sister drop her drink and turn completely pale. She realized right then that she had messed with the wrong woman. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and for my entire life, my family treated me like I was totally invisible. Growing up in the heart of Atlanta, my parents Brenda and Desmond worshipped at the altar of high society and fake prestige. They called me a glorified dirt digger and treated me like an absolute embarrassment to our family name. What they did not know was that I was the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of Terra Data Analytics, an environmental data technology corporation that literally held the keys to their fake luxury empire. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their entire lives and watched them lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you the most. 24 hours before that hospital confrontation, I was in Sedona, Arizona. The magnificent red rocks towered around us, casting long and dramatic shadows against the unforgiving desert floor. My younger sister Chloe had forced me into this all-terrain vehicle excursion. Chloe is 29 and lives her entire life for the internet. She dragged me out to the desert solely because she needed aesthetic content for her social media pages. Her husband Jamal, an arrogant man who desperately parades around Atlanta, claiming to be a luxury real estate mogul, needed good optics for a new mega development pitch. Chloe insisted we get footage of us looking like adventurous and highly successful sisters. I only agreed to come because I needed to run some preliminary environmental scans on a nearby parcel of land. The Arizona heat was absolutely punishing. The sun beat down on my shoulders as I steered my heavy-duty vehicle over the rough, rocky terrain. Chloe was riding ahead of me, pausing every 10 minutes to fix her hair, adjust her oversized designer sunglasses, and pose for the expensive camera she had mounted on her dashboard. She complained constantly. She complained about the red dust ruining her expensive manicure. She complained about the engine noise giving her a headache. She even complained about me ruining her perfectly curated shots because I was wearing practical outdoor survival gear instead of matching luxury athletic wear. I ignored her relentless whining and focused on my surroundings. Inside my heavy-duty survival backpack, which was strapped securely to my chest, I carried a satellite radio, 2 liters of purified water, a comprehensive first aid kit, and a highly encrypted work hard drive. That hard drive was the real reason I was out here. It contained highly sensitive geological survey data. That data conclusively proved Jamal was running a massive scam. His upcoming multi-million-dollar real estate development in Atlanta was sitting directly on top of a massive and highly unstable sinkhole. If he built on that land, innocent people would die. Jamal knew I was investigating his site, and he was absolutely terrified of what I might find. I strongly suspected Chloe had an ulterior motive for inviting me on this trip, but I never imagined how far she was genuinely willing to go to protect her husband and his completely fraudulent empire. We were about 5 miles deep into the remote canyon when the sky suddenly changed. The bright blue horizon turned a sickly bruised purple. The air grew incredibly heavy and still. The wind picked up howling through the massive rock formations with a terrifying primal intensity. Within minutes, a towering wall of thick red dust and sand rose up ahead of us, moving faster than anything I had ever seen in my life. A massive sandstorm was swallowing the canyon. I shouted at Chloe to turn her vehicle around, but the roaring wind completely swallowed my voice. The storm slammed into us like a physical blow. The air turned completely opaque. Thick, choking dust filled my lungs and blinded my eyes. I hit the brakes on my vehicle, fighting with all my strength to keep it from flipping over the jagged rocks. The visibility dropped to absolutely zero. I could barely see my own hands gripping the steering wheel. I knew I had to find shelter immediately, or the abrasive sand would strip our skin raw. I dismounted, carefully pulling my protective desert scarf tightly over my nose and mouth. I tried to find cover behind a large sandstone boulder, but the wind pushed me backward with incredible force. My heavy hiking boots slipped on the loose, treacherous gravel. I lost my footing entirely. I tumbled down a steep and rocky embankment, unable to stop my momentum. My body slammed violently against the hard earth, tearing my clothes and bruising my ribs. A sharp, sickening crack echoed in my ears as the side of my head struck a jagged piece of sandstone. Blinding, searing pain erupted behind my eyes. Warm blood immediately began pouring down the side of my face, mixing with the red desert dirt. I lay there gasping for air, the world spinning wildly in and out of focus. Every breath brought more choking sand into my throat. Through the swirling, aggressive dust, I saw a blurred shape moving toward me. It was Chloe. She had stopped her vehicle just at the top of the ridge. I reached my trembling hand out toward her, my vision blurring rapidly. I waited for my sister to pull me up to safety, to ask if I was badly hurt, to act like family. Instead, she stood over me, looking down at my bleeding head with an expression of pure, calculated coldness. She did not reach for my hand. She reached directly for my chest. With a sudden, forceful yank, she unclipped my survival backpack. She ripped the heavy bag away from my weakened grip. My emergency satellite radio, my only supply of fresh water, and my encrypted work hard drive were all inside that bag. I tried to speak, tried to beg her to help me, but I was choking on the dust and my own warm blood. Chloe slung my heavy backpack over her shoulder and looked down at me with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "I have a spa appointment at 4. Nia," she sneered, her voice cutting clearly and sharply through the howling wind. "Find your own way back, you liability." She turned on her heel, climbed back onto her expensive vehicle, and drove off into the blinding dust. I watched her taillights fade into the thick red storm, realizing she was deliberately leaving me out there to die. The betrayal cut deeper than the physical wound on my head. My own sister was willing to let me perish in the desert just to steal a hard drive and protect her husband and his fraudulent real estate scam. The darkness finally overtook me, and I lost consciousness on the cold rocks, unaware that this brutal abandonment would be the catalyst for the greatest retribution my family had ever seen. I remember the profound silence that followed after the roar of her engine finally faded completely into the distance. Lying there bleeding out alone in the harsh elements, my mind raced with 1,000 different thoughts. They had always treated me badly, but attempted murder by extreme negligence was an entirely new level of cruelty. I thought about my parents sitting comfortably back home in their pristine living room, oblivious to the monster they had raised. I thought about Jamal, desperate and cornered, waiting eagerly for the stolen environmental data that would falsely validate his sinking real estate project. The cold reality settled deep into my bones as the violent winds continued to batter my weakened body. They truly believed I was nothing more than collateral damage in their endless pursuit of wealth and unearned social status. But they severely miscalculated my strength and my resources. I was not going to die out here. I refused to let them win. I would survive this treacherous sandstorm, and when I finally made it back to civilization, I would unleash a storm of my own that would completely obliterate their entire world. My survival would become their ultimate and absolute destruction. The game had only just begun, and I held every single winning card in my bleeding hands. Their fake empire was destined to crumble into dust right before their eyes. The darkness did not claim me. Instead, a piercing rhythmic beep dragged my consciousness back from the brink. My eyes fluttered open to the harsh, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. I was lying in a pristine, sterile hospital bed. The smell of strong antiseptic and bleached linen filled my nostrils, replacing the suffocating red dust of the Sedona desert. My head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache, and thick bandages wrapped tightly around my skull. Intravenous lines snaked out of my left arm, pumping fluids into my dehydrated body. I tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through my ribs, reminding me of the brutal fall down the rocky embankment. A warm, steady hand gently pressed against my shoulder. I turned my heavy head and saw a sharp, no-nonsense African-American woman in a crisp white lab coat. Her name tag read Dr. Jenkins. She had the kind of commanding presence that demanded absolute respect, but her eyes held a deep, genuine compassion. She told me I was incredibly lucky to be alive. The local emergency search and rescue team had found me half buried under the sand just as the storm was reaching its absolute peak. They did not find me by accident. I had planned for every possible disaster. My heavy-duty survival backpack might have been stolen by my own sister, but Chloe was far too arrogant and far too ignorant to understand technology. She never noticed the sleek, custom-built smartwatch strapped tightly around my ankle under my heavy hiking socks. The moment my heart rate dropped dangerously low, the hidden SOS beacon activated, transmitting my precise GPS coordinates directly to the local authorities. I spent my first few hours of consciousness dealing with the immediate fallout. Dr. Jenkins assessed my injuries: a severe concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and extreme dehydration. While she examined my charts, I asked her for my emergency backup phone. It was kept securely in a lockbox with my personal effects. My family thought I was just a glorified dirt digger who barely made a living. They had absolutely no idea that my signature was the only thing keeping their entire fake empire afloat. Jamal had built his luxury real estate facade using my corporate credit lines. I had allowed it previously just to keep the peace and monitor his fraudulent activities from the inside. But the peace treaty was officially terminated the second Chloe drove away with my water. I sat up in my hospital bed, ignoring the shooting pain in my chest, and made a single decisive phone call to my wealth management team in Atlanta. I ordered them to immediately freeze every single black card attached to my name. Every line of credit Jamal relied on to fund his flashy lifestyle, and his fake developer persona was instantly terminated. Dr. Jenkins watched me issue these commands with a look of quiet respect. She did not ask questions. She simply adjusted my intravenous drip and told me to rest. I leaned back against the stark white pillows, feeling the cold satisfaction of retribution settling into my veins. I knew my family would eventually show up at the hospital. They had to maintain their perfect, caring family image for the public. I just had to wait. It did not take long. The heavy wooden door to my private recovery room swung open with an obnoxious dramatic flair. Chloe strutted into the sterile environment, looking like she had just stepped off a fashion runway. She wore a pristine, cream-colored designer pantsuit that cost more than my first car. Her hair was styled in flawless, cascading waves, and a pair of oversized, diamond-encrusted sunglasses rested on top of her head. The unmistakable scent of expensive perfume overpowered the hospital antiseptic. She held a large iced matcha latte in her perfectly manicured hand, the condensation dripping down the plastic cup. She did not rush to my bedside. She did not gasp in horror at the thick bandages wrapping my bleeding head. She did not drop her drink or cry tears of relief seeing that her older sister was actually alive. Instead, she stood in the center of the room, looking mildly inconvenienced by the hospital lighting. She checked her reflection in the dark screen of a nearby medical monitor, adjusting a stray strand of hair. She took a long, slow sip of her iced matcha latte, letting the ice cubes clink loudly against the plastic. Dr. Jenkins stepped forward, her clipboard held tightly to her chest. She looked at Chloe with a mixture of absolute disbelief and professional disgust. Any normal human being would be hysterical, begging for updates on their sibling's condition. Chloe just sighed heavily, checked her diamond watch, and looked directly at Dr. Jenkins. "So how is she?" Chloe asked, her tone dripping with casual impatience. "Can we discharge her already? Jamal and I have a dinner reservation at a 5-star steakhouse in an hour, and I absolutely cannot miss it. The investors are going to be there, and I need to look perfect." I lay completely still on the bed, watching my sister reveal the darkest, ugliest parts of her soul to a total stranger. She genuinely believed she had gotten away with it. She thought she had stolen the hard drive, secured her husband's fake real estate project, and left me to die a tragic accidental death in the desert. Now that I had survived, her only concern was making her fancy dinner reservation on time. She viewed my near-fatal injury as a minor scheduling conflict. Dr. Jenkins did not flinch. She stood tall, her presence dominating the room, and looked at Chloe with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. She glanced back at me, seeing the silent confirmation in my eyes, and then turned her sharp gaze back to my sister. "She is out of the woods," Dr. Jenkins said, her voice echoing clearly and firmly across the quiet room. "Her vital signs are stable, and her cognitive functions are completely intact." Chloe rolled her eyes and took another sip of her drink. "Great. So wrap her up and let us go. The smell of this place is ruining my appetite." Dr. Jenkins took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between herself and my sister. Which means Dr. Jenkins continued, completely ignoring Chloe's demand. She was awake and lucid enough to make a few very important phone calls this morning. She was awake enough to sign the necessary paperwork freezing your husband's black cards. Chloe froze. The plastic straw slipped from between her glossy lips. Her eyes darted from the doctor to me, a sudden flash of panic breaking through her arrogant facade. "What are you talking about?" Chloe snapped, her voice losing its smooth, practiced cadence. "What black cards? Jamal is a millionaire. He does not need her credit. She is his sole credit guarantor," Dr. Jenkins stated coldly, delivering the facts with lethal precision. "Every account, every line of luxury credit your husband uses to fund your lifestyle has just been permanently terminated by the woman you are currently treating like an inconvenience. Your dinner reservation might be a bit difficult to pay for tonight." The color completely drained from Chloe's face. The pristine, confident mask shattered instantly. Her jaw dropped open as the reality of the doctor's words crashed into her brain. She looked at me lying battered on the hospital bed, and for the first time in her life, she saw someone who held absolute power over her existence. The luxury cars, the designer bags, the lavish dinners in Buckhead, all of it was funded by the sister she had just left to die in a sandstorm. But Dr. Jenkins was not finished. She stood her ground, delivering the final devastating blow with icy perfection. "Also," Dr. Jenkins added, gesturing toward the heavy wooden door, "the local police department has been waiting for you in the main lobby for the past 20 minutes. They have some very serious questions regarding your actions in the canyon. You are officially under investigation for reckless endangerment and leaving the scene of a life-threatening accident." Chloe's hands began to shake uncontrollably. The large iced matcha latte slipped from her manicured fingers. The plastic cup hit the linoleum floor with a loud, wet smack. Green liquid and ice cubes exploded across the sterile white tiles, splashing onto the hem of her expensive cream-colored pantsuit. She did not even notice the stain. Her eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny the accusations, to spin another web of lies, but no sound came out. She was completely trapped. I watched her hyperventilate, enjoying every single second of her absolute panic. She had always relied on her beauty and her tears to manipulate her way out of trouble. She expected our parents to shield her from the consequences of her own toxic behavior. But our parents were not here, and tears could not unfreeze a corporate bank account or dismiss a police investigation. She was finally facing the real world, and the real world did not care about her aesthetic social media content or her dinner reservations. I pressed the button on my hospital bed, slowly raising myself into a seated position. The pain in my ribs was agonizing, but I did not let it show on my face. I looked down at the spilled drink, ruining her designer shoes, and then I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I did not yell. I did not scream. I spoke with the calm, terrifying certainty of a woman who had just conquered death itself. "You should probably go talk to the officers, Chloe," I said quietly, letting the words hang heavily in the cold hospital air. "I hear they do not like to be kept waiting. And you really would not want to miss your dinner reservation." Chloe stumbled backward, her designer heels slipping slightly in the puddle of spilled green tea. She looked at Dr. Jenkins, hoping for some kind of sympathy, but found only a stern, unyielding gaze. She looked back at me, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The golden child of the family had finally realized that she was no longer untouchable. She turned and practically ran out of the hospital room, her panicked footsteps echoing loudly down the corridor as she fled toward the lobby to face the police. Dr. Jenkins walked over to the mess on the floor, shook her head in disgust, and pressed a button on the wall to call for a janitor. She turned to me, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Your vital signs are elevating," she noted calmly, checking the monitor beside my bed. "It is just the adrenaline," I replied, leaning back against the pillows. "And the satisfaction of seeing justice finally take its course." Dr. Jenkins nodded, her expression entirely professional, but underscored with a deep, silent solidarity. "You get some rest, Nia. You are going to need your strength for whatever comes next. They are not going to take this quietly." I knew she was right. Chloe running to the police was only the opening skirmish. The real battle would begin the moment my parents and Jamal found out what I had done. They would not accept defeat. They would try to gaslight me, manipulate me, and force me back into my role as the family's scapegoat. They would try to protect Jamal's fraudulent real estate empire at any cost, even if it meant destroying me completely. But I was ready for them. The sandstorm had stripped away the last remnants of my familial loyalty. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. The game had shifted entirely, and I was the one making the rules now. I would let them come to me. I would let them try their usual toxic tactics. And then I would unleash the full weight of my shadow empire upon them. The heavy wooden door to my private recovery room violently crashed open, slamming so hard against the wall that the sound echoed like a gunshot down the sterile hospital corridor. My mother Brenda and my father Desmond stormed into the space like a hurricane of misplaced entitlement and aggressive denial. They were dressed in their usual uniform of wealthy Atlanta pretension. Brenda wore a pristine beige tailored suit that screamed country club luncheon, her hair sprayed into a rigid helmet of perfection. Desmond trailed right beside her, wearing a custom-fitted navy blazer and a gold watch he could not actually afford. His chest puffed out in a pathetic display of artificial authority. Trailing just behind them, clutching Brenda's arm like a frightened toddler, was Chloe. The terror she had shown only minutes ago when Dr. Jenkins mentioned the police had now miraculously transformed into a theatrical display of profound victimhood. She was hyperventilating, forcing loud, jagged sobs from her throat while burying her face in our mother's expensive silk shoulder. I sat upright in my hospital bed. The thick white bandages were wrapped securely around my bleeding head. Intravenous tubes were still taped to my bruised arms. A normal parent would rush to the hospital bed. A normal parent would drop everything, fall to their knees, and thank heaven that their oldest daughter had survived a brutal and bloody accident in the unforgiving desert. But Brenda and Desmond were not normal parents. They did not even glance at the medical monitors tracking my heart rate. They did not look at the heavy bruising purpling the side of my face. Instead, they formed a protective physical barricade around Chloe. Brenda wrapped both of her arms securely around my sister, stroking her hair, and glaring at me with eyes full of absolute venom. "How could you do this?" Brenda shrieked, her shrill voice completely shattering the quiet calm of the recovery ward. "How could you possibly call the police on your own sister? Are you completely out of your mind?" I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling the last remaining shred of my familial affection evaporate into thin air. "I did not call the police," I replied, keeping my voice intentionally flat and devoid of any emotion. "The emergency rescue team called the police when they found me half dead in the sand, bleeding from a severe head wound with absolutely no water and no survival gear. It is standard legal protocol for reckless endangerment and attempted manslaughter." Chloe let out a loud, exaggerated wail, gripping Brenda's blazer tighter. She panicked. Brenda screamed back at me, her face turning a mottled shade of angry red. "She panicked in the storm, Nia. The wind was howling and the sand was blowing everywhere. You know your sister is delicate. She has a highly sensitive nervous system. You cannot expect her to think clearly in a survival situation." She was terrified. She was terrified, I repeated, letting the absolute absurdity of the statement hang heavily in the room. She was so terrified that she took the time to unclip my survival backpack, steal my emergency satellite radio, take my only source of drinking water, and drive away. "That does not sound like panic, Mother. That sounds like a highly calculated theft and a deliberate death sentence." Desmond stepped forward, pulling his shoulders back as he tried to physically intimidate me. He pointed a manicured finger directly at my bandaged face. You watch your tone when you speak to your mother, he commanded, his voice dripping with condescension. You have always been prone to this kind of aggressive, jealous hysteria. You are taking a simple misunderstanding and blowing it completely out of proportion just to punish your sister. Jealous hysteria, I asked, locking eyes with my father. What exactly am I jealous of, Desmond? You are jealous of her life, he spat back without missing a single beat. You always have been. Look at you, Nia. You are a worthless drone flyer. You spend your days digging around in the dirt, flying little remote control toys over empty plots of land, scraping by on whatever pennies your low-level surveying contracts pay you. Meanwhile, Chloe is married to Jamal. She lives in a gorgeous mansion. She wears designer clothes. She has social standing. Jamal is building a luxury real estate empire, and you are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see her younger sister thrive. I listened to his vicious monologue with a strange sense of detachment. He truly believed every single word he was saying. He honestly thought I was a failure. He had absolutely no idea that his precious son-in-law was a total fraud, drowning in massive debt, relying entirely on my corporate credit lines to keep his fake empire from collapsing. Desmond worshipped the illusion of Jamal's wealth so blindly that he was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect it. Let us get the facts straight, I said, shifting my weight against the stiff hospital pillows, ignoring the sharp pain radiating through my cracked ribs. I was conducting a preliminary environmental scan in the desert. The storm hit. I fell and smashed my head against a rock. Chloe stopped her vehicle. She looked at me while I was bleeding. She stole my hard drive. She stole my water. She told me she had a spa appointment at 4 o'clock and she left me to die. Those are the cold, hard facts. She did not panic. She made a choice. Brenda waved her hands in the air dismissively, letting out a loud scoff of derision. Oh, listen to yourself, Nia. Listen to the absolute garbage coming out of your mouth. Spa appointments, stealing hard drives. You sound completely delusional. She is not thinking straight. Brenda, Desmond added, turning to his wife with a look of manufactured concern. It is the concussion. The doctor said she hit her head. She is confused. Her brain is scrambling the memories. I am not confused, I stated firmly, gripping the thin hospital blanket. I know exactly what happened out there. No, you do not. Brenda snapped, taking a threatening step toward my bed. You have a severe head injury. You are hallucinating. Chloe told us exactly what happened. She said the dust was so thick she lost sight of you. She drove around for 20 minutes, honking her horn and screaming your name. When she could not find you, she drove back to the resort to get help. That is the truth. I looked at Chloe. She was peeking out from behind Brenda's shoulder, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She had spun a beautiful, tragic lie to play the victim, completely ignoring the fact that my automated micro-drone had been tracking us the entire time, recording every single second of her betrayal in crystal-clear, high-definition video. If she went to get help, I asked quietly, why did the local search and rescue team find me using the distress beacon on my smartwatch? Why didn't Chloe call emergency services? Because she was in shock, Brenda yelled, her voice echoing loudly again. She was traumatized by losing you in the storm. Do you have any idea how much emotional distress your sister has been under for the past 24 hours? She has not slept a wink. She has been crying non-stop. She literally walked in here 20 minutes ago holding an iced matcha latte and asked the doctor if I could be discharged so she would not miss her dinner reservation, I pointed out smoothly. Does that sound like severe emotional distress to you? Desmond slammed his hand down hard on the plastic tray table next to my bed, making the empty water pitcher rattle. Enough of these ridiculous lies, he ordered, his face twisting into an ugly scowl. We are not going to stand here and listen to you assassinate your sister's character because your concussed brain is making up wild, dramatic fantasies. We know you are angry about your little dirt-digging job, but you are not going to drag our family name through the mud to make yourself feel better. He leaned closer to me, his cologne smelling sharp and metallic. You are going to fix this right now, Nia. The police are downstairs asking questions that could ruin everything. Do you have any idea what kind of damage a reckless endangerment investigation would do to our elite Atlanta reputation? Do you know what the Vanguard investors would think if they heard Jamal's wife was involved in a criminal investigation? They would pull their funding from the mega development immediately. You are putting our entire family legacy at risk. Family legacy, I thought to myself. Their legacy was a house of cards built on lies, credit card debt, and stolen money. But I kept my expression perfectly blank. I want you to pick up that phone, Brenda commanded, pointing a rigid finger at the bedside table. I want you to call the police desk downstairs. You are going to tell those officers that you hit your head, that you were confused, and that you made a terrible mistake. You are going to tell them that Chloe did absolutely nothing wrong. You are going to drop these ridiculous charges instantly. And if I refuse, I asked, watching their faces carefully. Desmond's eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. If you refuse, you will no longer be a part of this family. We will cut you off completely. We will publicly denounce you. We will make sure everyone in Atlanta knows that you suffered a mental break and turned against your own blood. You will have absolutely nothing, Nia. You will be completely alone. They played their ultimate trump card. In their minds, being cut off from the glamorous high society world of Brenda and Desmond was a fate worse than death. They thought the threat of social exile would bring me to my knees. They truly believed I was a struggling, lonely woman who desperately craved their approval and their fake prestige. They were so blinded by their own toxic narcissism that they could not see the predator sitting right in front of them. They did not know that being cut off from them was exactly what I wanted. They did not know that they were actively threatening a billionaire who owned the very ground they walked on. I looked at Brenda's perfectly sprayed hair. I looked at Desmond's cheap gold watch. I looked at Chloe's tear-stained, panicked face hiding behind them. They had crossed the point of no return. The gaslighting, the emotional abuse, the absolute disregard for my life. It was all laid bare in this sterile hospital room. Okay, I said softly, letting my shoulders drop as if the weight of their words had finally crushed my spirit. Okay, you win. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, instantly dropping her aggressive posture. She patted Chloe's arm triumphantly. See, darling, I told you she would eventually see reason. She just needed to be reminded of what is truly important. Desmond adjusted his blazer, looking immensely satisfied with himself. It is about time you showed some respect for this family, Nia. Now we are going to get this mess cleaned up, and then you are going to apologize to your sister for causing her so much unnecessary stress. I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes cast downward in a perfect display of submission. But beneath the thin hospital blanket, my hands were clenched into tight, steady fists. The trap was set. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had successfully manipulated the narrative and secured their perfect, fraudulent lives. They had absolutely no idea that they had just handed me the match I needed to burn their entire world to ashes. Before Brenda could gloat any further, the heavy wooden door to my recovery room swung open once again. Jamal stepped over the threshold, radiating the kind of arrogant confidence that only a highly practiced con artist could possibly manage. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive charcoal gray bespoke suit that was tailored so tightly it looked physically uncomfortable. A perfectly folded silk pocket square peeked out of his breast pocket, and his leather shoes were polished to a blinding mirror shine. He looked exactly like the fake luxury real estate mogul he constantly pretended to be on local television broadcasts. He immediately took control of the small space, acting like the undisputed savior of our deeply dysfunctional family. He flashed a brilliant, highly practiced smile that absolutely did not reach his cold, calculating, and predatory eyes. Jamal smoothly placed a heavy hand right onto my father, offering him a look of deep masculine solidarity and fake reassurance. He then kissed Brenda gracefully on the cheek, murmuring something soothing and patronizing about how incredibly well she was holding up under the immense pressure of the morning. Finally, he turned his full attention to his wife standing quietly in the bright corner. Chloe immediately threw herself into his waiting arms, sobbing dramatically and loudly into his expensive lapel. He stroked her highlighted hair with exaggerated performative tenderness, shushing her gently, as if she were the fragile victim of some great unspeakable tragedy, rather than the ruthless perpetrator of a brutal, cold-blooded crime. Dr. Jenkins stepped forward from the corner of the room, her arms crossed firmly over her chest, She was clearly completely unimpressed by Jamal and his theatrical display of unearned wealth and fake affection. She opened her mouth to inform him that visiting hours were restricted for severe patients. Before she could speak a single syllable, Jamal raised his manicured hand in a dismissive, highly disrespectful gesture. He did not even bother to look at her face. "I need you to leave right now," Jamal told Dr. Jenkins, his voice dripping with unbearable wealthy entitlement. "This is a highly private family matter, and we absolutely do not need any low-level hospital staff eavesdropping on our personal conversations. You can return when we are completely finished here." Dr. Jenkins stiffened visibly, her jaw clenching so tightly I could see the muscle jumping angrily in her tense, flushed right cheek. She looked directly at me, her eyes silently asking if I wanted her to intervene, call security, and throw them all out into the street. I gave her a very subtle, almost imperceptible nod, signaling that I was okay, and that she could safely leave. I desperately needed to see exactly what Jamal was planning to do next. I needed them all to feel completely secure and powerful in their little trap. Dr. Jenkins gave Jamal a look of pure concentrated disgust, turned sharply on her heel, and walked briskly out of the quiet hospital room without speaking a word. The moment her white coat disappeared into the brightly lit hallway, Jamal reached out and pushed the heavy wooden door shut. I heard the solid metallic click of the deadbolt latch engaging. The ominous sound echoed loudly in the sterile space. I was now completely physically trapped in the room with the four of them. Jamal slowly turned around to face me. The warm, comforting savior facade vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating and ruthless stare of a predator finally cornering its weakened prey. He slowly unbuttoned his suit jacket and stepped far away from the weeping, trembling Chloe. Moving deliberately toward the foot of my hospital bed, he looked down at my thick, bandaged head, my deeply bruised face, and the clear intravenous tubes running directly into my left arm. He did not show a single ounce of human pity or basic sibling concern. He simply looked overwhelmingly annoyed that my near-fatal accident had temporarily inconvenienced his incredibly busy schedule. "You always have to cause a massive, embarrassing scene, do you not?" Nia Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave into a smooth, highly dangerous rhythm. "You just cannot stand the undeniable fact that Chloe is successful. You cannot handle the reality that my new luxury development in Buckhead is going to make us millions of dollars while you are still scraping by playing in the dirt. You are so entirely consumed by your own bitter, pathetic jealousy that you are actually willing to drag our spotless family reputation through the mud just to get some desperate attention." I remained perfectly silent, leaning back against the stark white hospital pillows, keeping my breathing shallow to protect my cracked ribs. I let him talk. I let him dig his own massive grave right in front of my eyes. But lucky for you, Jamal continued pacing slowly and arrogantly at the foot of my bed. "I am a very generous man. I am a man who heavily values our family legacy above all else. I am willing to fix this massive, disastrous mess you have carelessly created today, but we are going to do things exactly my way from now on." He reached into the inner breast pocket of his bespoke suit jacket and pulled out a thick, meticulously folded stack of highly official legal documents. He slapped the heavy papers down onto my plastic tray table extremely forcefully. The loud, aggressive smack made me flinch slightly. He smoothed his large hand over the top page, making absolutely sure I could clearly see the bold legal headings printed across the very top. "This is a comprehensive liability waiver and a strict ironclad non-disclosure agreement," Jamal explained, tapping his manicured index finger repeatedly against the thick stack of paper. "It legally states that your little dramatic accident in the desert was entirely your own clumsy fault. It explicitly states that you panicked during the sandstorm, that you slipped and fell due to your own sheer incompetence and complete fear. It states that Chloe acted with absolute, undeniable heroism in her brave attempts to save your life. It legally completely exonerates my lovely wife from any and all alleged wrongdoing or criminal negligence." He leaned much closer to me, his heavy, expensive cologne mixing sickeningly with the sharp smell of hospital antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. "It also forcefully includes a blanket transfer of all digital data rights." He added, his dark eyes locking onto mine with terrifying predatory intensity. That encrypted hard drive Chloe righteously retrieved from your survival bag in the desert now legally belongs entirely to me forever. All the geological survey data, all the environmental scans, everything you secretly collected on that specific plot of land is now the sole undisputed intellectual property of my real estate firm. You will never speak of the land, the structural sinkhole, or the confidential contents of that specific drive ever again to anyone. I stared blankly at the extensive paperwork. He was literally trying to force me to sign away the very undeniable evidence that completely proved his multi-million-dollar luxury development was a deadly, fraudulent, and highly illegal scam. He desperately needed that hard drive to forge permits. He desperately needed my legal consent to use the stolen data without facing severe corporate espionage and federal theft charges. He actually believed he had me completely cornered and entirely defeated. And what exactly do I get in return for signing away my legal rights and dropping the pending police charges against your wife? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat, weak, and entirely submissive. Jamal let out a short, incredibly arrogant bark of a laugh that filled the small hospital room. He looked back at Brenda and Desmond, shaking his head slowly as if I were a foolish child. He turned back to face me, a cruel, highly mocking smirk twisting his handsome features into something truly ugly. "If you sign these documents today," Nia Jamal said deliberately, dragging out every single syllable for maximum psychological humiliation, "I will be incredibly surprisingly generous to you. I will personally save you from your pathetic, poverty-stricken, and meaningless life. I am currently building the most exclusive high-end luxury real estate development in all of Buckhead, Atlanta. It is going to be an absolute masterpiece of modern architecture and wealthy living. It requires a massive, dedicated staff to keep running. If you sign this waiver right now, I will personally guarantee you a full-time job as the head janitorial supervisor for the entire residential complex. You will get a nice clean uniform, a decent hourly wage, and all the industrial cleaning supplies you could ever possibly need," Jamal sneered viciously. "Let us be completely honest with ourselves for a second, Nia. It is the absolute best a college dropout dirt digger like you will ever possibly get in this difficult life. You should literally be thanking me on your hands and knees for throwing you this incredible financial lifeline." The heavy silence in the sterile hospital room was absolutely suffocating. I stared at Jamal, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of his disgusting janitorial job offer. Before I could even formulate a response to his breathtaking arrogance, Brenda aggressively pushed her way to the front of the small group. My mother's face was twisted into a mask of pure, unbridled rage. She practically vibrated with a toxic mixture of desperation and fury, her perfectly manicured hands clenched tightly at her sides. She leaned over my hospital bed, invading my personal space, her expensive floral perfume sitting heavily in the stagnant air. "You are going to sign that contract right now, Nia." Brenda hissed, her voice a sharp, terrifying whisper that echoed off the cold linoleum walls. "You are going to sign it, and you are going to drop this pathetic, jealous vendetta against your sister. Jamal's new mega development is not just another real estate project. It is the absolute pinnacle of this family's entire legacy. It is our one guaranteed ticket to unimaginable permanent generational wealth. It is the key to securing our place in the absolute highest echelons of Atlanta high society forever. And you are deliberately trying to completely destroy it out of pure, unadulterated spite." I looked from Brenda's flushed face to Desmond. My father stood firmly behind his wife, nodding his head in solemn, pathetic agreement. He crossed his arms over his tailored blazer, looking down at me as if I were a piece of trash that had somehow blown into his pristine driveway. "Your mother is absolutely right," Desmond added, his tone dripping with profound disappointment and unrelenting scorn. "You have always been a dark cloud hovering over this family, Nia. You have always resented Chloe's natural grace, her incredible beauty, and her effortless success. You could not stand watching her marry a brilliant visionary like Jamal while you wasted your life flying drones over empty dirt lots. Now you are literally making up insane criminal lies about your own flesh and blood just to drag us all down into your miserable, impoverished reality. If you do not pick up that pen and sign those legal documents immediately, we are completely finished with you." I will legally and permanently disown you. We will completely erase your name from the family records. You will never set foot in our home again. You will be entirely cut off, destitute, and absolutely alone in this world. The psychological screws were turning tighter and tighter. They were relentlessly trying to crush me under the immense weight of their combined emotional manipulation. I took a slow, painful breath, feeling the sharp, agonizing pull of my cracked ribs with every single inhalation. I looked at the heavy wooden door tightly closed and locked by Jamal. I was physically trapped in a vulnerable position. I was battered, bleeding, and strapped to a medical bed with intravenous lines anchored deep into my bruised veins. I was outnumbered 4-1 by people who had already proven they were completely willing to let me die in a desert sandstorm to protect their fraudulent interests. If I fought them right now, if I revealed my true identity, or screamed for the hospital security guards, it would only create a chaotic and unpredictable scene. Jamal might panic and destroy the hard drive. Brenda and Desmond would undoubtedly twist the narrative to the press before my own high-powered legal team could properly intercept them. I absolutely needed them to leave this room immediately so I could execute the flawless, meticulously planned destruction of their entire empire. I needed them to walk out of this hospital feeling completely victorious, entirely secure and utterly arrogant. They needed to believe they had won. It was time to give them exactly the performance they desperately wanted to see. I closed my eyes for a brief, calculated moment, summoning every ounce of childhood trauma and every memory of their relentless neglect. When I opened my eyes again, I forced a thick sheen of wet, glossy tears to pool rapidly in the corners of my vision. I let my lower lip tremble violently. I allowed my breathing to become shallow, rapid, and erratic, perfectly mimicking the physical symptoms of a profound and devastating panic attack. I slumped my shoulders forward, deliberately making myself look incredibly small, profoundly broken and utterly defeated. "Please," I whimpered, making sure my voice cracked and pitched upward in a flawless display of desperate submission. "Please just stop yelling at me. My head hurts so badly. I cannot think straight. I am so tired. Please do not disown me. I have nothing else." The transformation in the room was instant and incredibly sickening. The heavy tension evaporated instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating aura of victorious gloating. Brenda visibly relaxed her rigid posture, a smug, highly satisfied smile spreading slowly across her perfectly painted lips. Desmond uncrossed his arms and puffed out his chest, looking like a victorious general who had just single-handedly conquered a defiant enemy nation. Jamal simply chuckled, a dark, rumbling sound of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "That is much better." Nia Jamal cooed, his voice sliding back into that patronizing fake savior tone. "See how simple things can be when you finally decide to cooperate and show a little bit of basic respect." He picked up an expensive, heavy silver pen from his jacket pocket and thrust it aggressively toward my face. He tapped the signature line on the final page of the thick liability waiver and the comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. "Sign it!" Jamal commanded, his eyes shining with greedy, predatory triumph. "Sign it, and we will graciously forget this entire unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened. We will let you keep your miserable little life, and maybe I will even throw in a signing bonus for your new janitorial position." I reached out with my right hand. I deliberately made my fingers shake violently, as if the sheer emotional terror of the moment was completely overwhelming my nervous system. I grasped the cold silver pen clumsily, letting it slip slightly against my skin. A hot, thick tear rolled slowly down my bruised cheek, dropping silently onto the crisp white paper. I looked up at Chloe, who was now stepping out from behind our parents. The terrified, sobbing victim act had completely vanished from my sister's face. Chloe was literally glowing with cruel, malicious joy. She watched me holding the pen, her eyes completely devoid of any human empathy. She was thoroughly enjoying my manufactured humiliation. She was relishing the sight of her older sister completely broken and begging for mercy. I lowered my eyes, gripping the pen tightly, and scrawled a messy, frantic, and barely legible signature across the bottom of the legal document. I signed away my rights to the stolen hard drive. I signed away my ability to sue Chloe for leaving me to die. I signed the absolute fake confession stating that the desert accident was entirely my own clumsy fault. The very second the tip of the silver pen lifted from the heavy paper, Chloe lunged forward like a striking snake. She practically snatched the document right out of my trembling hands, moving with an aggressive, hungry speed. She held the freshly signed paper up to the harsh fluorescent hospital lights, scrutinizing my messy signature with a wide, triumphant grin. "Oh, look at this," Chloe mocked, her voice ringing out with sharp musical cruelty. The great independent dirt digger finally bends the knee. "You are so utterly pathetic, Nia. You really thought you could cause problems for us. You really thought you could threaten Jamal's business. You are absolutely nothing. You have always been nothing." She carefully folded the legal documents and slid them securely into her expensive designer handbag, patting the leather surface with immense satisfaction. Jamal retrieved his silver pen from my lap, wiping it meticulously on his pocket square, as if my very touch had somehow contaminated the expensive metal. "Good girl," Jamal sneered, looking down at me with an expression of profound disgust. "The Human Resources Department for my new residential complex will contact you next week regarding your janitorial uniform sizes. Do not expect any special family treatment when you start scrubbing my floors." Brenda adjusted her beige blazer, looking at me one last time with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "Let this be a permanent lesson to you, Nia. You do not ever cross this family. We protect our own, and you have finally learned exactly where your place is." Desmond did not even bother to speak to me. He simply turned his back, opening the heavy wooden hospital door, and stepping out into the brightly lit corridor. Brenda followed him immediately, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum. Jamal placed a protective, possessive hand on the small of Chloe's back, guiding her toward the exit. Chloe paused perfectly in the doorway. She turned her head, looking back at me as I lay slumped and crying softly against the sterile white hospital pillows. She flashed me one final, devastatingly cruel smile, her eyes glittering with pure malice. "Enjoy your miserable little life, Sister Chloe," whispered harshly. The heavy wooden door clicked firmly shut behind them, sealing me alone inside the quiet recovery room. The sound of their confident, arrogant footsteps faded rapidly down the hallway as they marched out to face the waiting police officers armed with the freshly signed liability waiver they believed would completely exonerate Chloe and secure Jamal's stolen data forever. They walked out of the hospital feeling utterly invincible. They genuinely believed they had successfully crushed my spirit, dominated my future, and completely neutralized the only threat to their massive fraudulent empire. They thought they had won the ultimate victory. They thought they had left me broken, humiliated, and eternally defeated. They were completely, spectacularly, and catastrophically wrong. As the absolute silence of the room washed over me, the fake trembling in my hands instantly ceased. The carefully manufactured tears dried on my bruised cheeks. My erratic, panicky breathing leveled out, returning to a slow, methodical, and incredibly calm rhythm. I sat perfectly still in the sterile hospital bed, staring directly at the closed wooden door. The oppressive weight of their toxic presence had finally lifted, leaving the room feeling lighter and much colder. I methodically reached up with my steady right hand and carefully wiped away the remaining moisture from my eyes. The performance was officially over. The curtain had closed on the pathetic, defeated sister act. It was absolutely essential that they walked out of here believing their extortion had worked flawlessly. By forcing me to sign that specific contract under immense psychological duress, they had unknowingly handed my legal team the exact piece of physical evidence required to prove premeditated extortion, corporate theft, and witness intimidation. Jamal thought that non-disclosure agreement was his absolute shield. He thought the transfer of data rights made his possession of my encrypted hard drive entirely legal. He completely failed to realize that an extortion contract signed under direct threat of familial disownment and extreme psychological manipulation by a patient suffering from a medically documented severe head injury was not just legally unenforceable. It was a massive glowing beacon for federal prosecutors. Brenda and Desmond had perfectly played their parts as the enabling accomplices. Their aggressive threats of disownment and their ruthless verbal abuse had provided the exact hostile environment needed to invalidate every single word on that paper. And Chloe, my vain, empty-headed sister, had practically skipped out of the room carrying the smoking gun directly in her designer handbag. I slowly shifted my battered body on the mattress, ignoring the sharp protest of my cracked ribs. The pain was merely a temporary physical inconvenience. It was absolutely nothing compared to the monumental storm of retribution I was about to unleash upon the city of Atlanta. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of wealth, power, and reputation. They wanted to treat me like an ignorant, helpless pawn. They had no idea they were sitting directly on a massive, unstable sinkhole of their own making, and I held the only detonator. The room was quiet. The trap was set. The predators had foolishly swallowed the poisoned bait. I was finally alone and I was completely ready for war. I reached over to the small plastic tray table next to my bed. My fingers brushed against the sterile plastic of my water pitcher. The cool surface grounded me, bringing my focus back to the immediate next steps. I needed to move quickly. The window of opportunity was incredibly narrow. Jamal and Chloe would undoubtedly rush to present that extorted liability waiver to the police officers waiting in the hospital lobby. They would use it to dismiss the reckless endangerment investigation, claiming the entire desert incident was a tragic but mutually resolved family accident. Let them dismiss the local police. The local police were absolutely nothing compared to the federal agencies that would soon be tearing through Jamal's financial records. I needed to let them experience a few days of total blissful ignorance. I needed Jamal to take that stolen encrypted hard drive and confidently plug it into his corporate network. I needed him to present that falsified environmental data to his billionaire investors. The higher he climbed on his ladder of fraudulent lies, the more devastating and spectacular his ultimate destruction would be. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the cool, conditioned hospital air fill my lungs. The game was no longer about simple survival in the desert. It was about total, uncompromising annihilation of their fake reality. They had stolen my water and left me to choke on the red dust. Now I was going to strip away their money, their status, their freedom, and their entire legacy. I was going to leave them with absolutely nothing. And the most beautiful part of this entire perfectly orchestrated plan was that they had personally handed me every single weapon I needed to execute it. I stared at the closed door, a cold, predatory smile finally breaking across my bruised and battered face. "Enjoy your victory today, family," I whispered into the empty, silent room. "Because tomorrow, the real storm hits Atlanta." The heavy wooden door clicked shut securely, and the absolute silence of the recovery ward washed over me completely. Instantly, the pathetic, trembling victim persona I had so carefully projected vanished without a single trace. My tears evaporated instantly, drying tightly against my bruised skin. My erratic breathing slowed into a deep, highly controlled rhythm. The terrified expression I had worn for my parents completely melted away, replaced by a mask of cold, unyielding stone. I was no longer their victim. I felt entirely awake and sharply focused. The ultimate retaliation was finally ready to be fully unleashed today. I slowly pushed back the thin, scratchy hospital blanket. Moving with deliberate, calculated precision, I ignored the sharp protest of my fractured ribs. I reached down toward the hem of my standard-issue hospital gown. Hidden securely within a discreet waterproof medical pouch taped tightly against my left thigh was my secondary device. It was a heavy-duty, fully encrypted satellite burner phone, utterly untraceable and entirely secure from any local network monitoring. I pulled the sleek black device from its hiding place, feeling the cold, familiar weight of absolute power resting solidly in the palm of my injured hand. My family genuinely believed I was a struggling, low-level surveyor. They thought I spent my miserable days flying cheap drones over empty dirt lots for minimum wage scraping by, while looking at Chloe with bitter, pathetic jealousy. They bought into their own arrogant delusions so completely that they never bothered to look beneath the surface. They never investigated the mysterious corporate entity that handled my surveying contracts. If Desmond or Jamal had possessed even an ounce of actual business intelligence, they would have easily discovered the undeniable, terrifying truth about my so-called pathetic, impoverished dirt-digging surveying career. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner on the satellite phone. The dark screen instantly illuminated, bathing my battered face in a harsh blue light. I bypassed the complex security protocols with practiced ease and opened the highly encrypted communication application. I typed in a secure randomized 12-digit number and pressed the call button. The line did not even ring. It connected instantly to a secure server located thousands of miles away in a heavily guarded corporate building. A deep, familiar, and highly professional voice answered immediately, completely lacking any standard greeting or unnecessary time-wasting social pleasantries. Status report. Marcus demanded, his voice crisp and clear over the encrypted connection. Marcus was my lead corporate attorney, a ruthless, brilliant legal shark who commanded a massive team of the absolute best litigators in the entire country. He was the chief legal counsel for Teradata Analytics. Teradata was not a struggling local surveying firm. It was a massive, multi-billion-dollar global empire, specializing in advanced geological intelligence, subterranean mapping, and predictive environmental modeling. I was not a low-level drone operator. I was the sole founder, majority shareholder, and billionaire chief executive officer of Teradata Analytics worldwide. I built my massive shadow empire completely under the radar, carefully utilizing a complex web of holding companies and silent partnerships to mask my ultimate ownership. I deliberately let my toxic family believe I was a massive failure because it provided the absolute perfect cover. It kept their greedy, grasping hands far away from my actual wealth. It allowed me to observe their financial crimes and moral bankruptcies from a safe, highly insulated distance. They thought they were the elite titans of Atlanta high society, completely unaware that my personal net worth eclipsed their combined assets 100 times over. "The trap is officially sprung," Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low and incredibly steady. Jamal just walked out of my hospital room carrying the signed liability waiver and the comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. He also explicitly forced me to sign away all intellectual property rights to the stolen hard drive. Chloe has the physical documents secured in her handbag. They practically danced out of the room. They are completely convinced they have entirely neutralized me. They genuinely believe they have secured the stolen data and legally protected their incredibly fragile, highly fraudulent luxury real estate development project in Buckhead. I heard Marcus let out a short, sharp breath of pure professional satisfaction over the secure line. "Excellent work, Nia," he replied smoothly. They walked right into the kill zone. That entire luxury mega development is sitting on borrowed time. Jamal aggressively marketed that project as the absolute pinnacle of architectural achievement. He secured hundreds of millions of dollars from Vanguard investors based on fraudulent geological reports. He knew his original surveyors were cheap and incompetent. When he finally realized the severe danger, he secretly hired my firm through a shell company to conduct a highly advanced subterranean environmental scan. My proprietary technology mapped the exact bedrock structure beneath his massive construction site. The undeniable, terrifying truth was that his highly publicized luxury development was sitting directly on top of a massive, highly unstable, and rapidly expanding sinkhole. The entire structural foundation was completely compromised. If he continued building, the entire complex would inevitably collapse, taking hundreds of innocent lives and completely bankrupting his investors. Jamal desperately needed my proprietary environmental data to figure out a way to forge the municipal safety permits. He needed my highly detailed subterranean maps to artificially doctor the structural integrity reports for the city. He knew Teradata Analytics would legally report the massive sinkhole hazard to the federal environmental agencies. That is exactly why he sent Chloe to spy on me in the desert. He needed to physically steal the raw data drive before my servers could officially process the findings and trigger an automatic federal safety shutdown. He sent his own wife to steal from her sister, completely oblivious to the fact that I had engineered the entire scenario. I laughed softly into the phone, the sound carrying a sharp, razor-thin edge of absolute unapologetic cruelty and deeply satisfied, intense, predatory anticipation. "They took the bait," Marcus, I said, smiling a cold, terrifying predator smile into the darkness of the hospital room. Let them use the fake drive. Let Jamal confidently plug that stolen hardware directly into his corporate network. Let him present those manipulated, fraudulent geological reports to his billionaire investors and the Atlanta Municipal Zoning Board. The drive Chloe stole in the desert does not contain the actual catastrophic sinkhole data. It contains a highly sophisticated, aggressively replicating digital Trojan horse. The very second Jamal accesses those files, my custom software will silently infiltrate his entire corporate financial network immediately. The Trojan will systematically download every single hidden email, every illegal wire transfer, and every forged signature he has ever created. It will perfectly map his entire history of wire fraud, money laundering, and corporate embezzlement. He is going to literally hand the federal government an immaculate, perfectly organized roadmap of his entire criminal existence. And the extortion contract they just forced me to sign in this hospital room is the absolute cherry on top of this beautiful disaster. They committed premeditated extortion and witness intimidation against an injured patient, creating an airtight, undeniable case for severe federal racketeering charges. Prepare the federal lawsuit. Marcus, I commanded, my voice ringing with absolute, uncompromising authority. I want the complete destruction of his entire facade. When Jamal submits those forged safety permits using the data from my fake drive, I want the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Securities and Exchange Commission waiting for him at his grand opening gala. I want his Vanguard investors completely informed of his massive catastrophic fraud. I want every single one of his heavily leveraged bank accounts frozen, seized, and aggressively dismantled by federal authorities before he can even blink an eye. Consider it done, Nia Marcus replied, his tone reflecting my own ruthless determination. We have already drafted the initial injunctions. The digital trap is fully armed and awaiting his connection. What about your parents and your sister? Do you want us to proceed with the secondary civil actions regarding their direct complicity in the extortion and the desert incident? I leaned back against the sterile white pillows, staring at the ceiling. Brenda and Desmond had made their final choice. They had gleefully thrown me to the wolves to protect their pathetic fake status. They deserved absolutely no mercy whatsoever today. Take them all down, I stated coldly, feeling absolutely zero hesitation. Chloe is going to face severe criminal charges for grand theft, reckless endangerment, and attempted manslaughter for leaving me to die in the Sandstorm. Brenda and Desmond will be legally named as willing accomplices in that massive extortion plot. I want their country club memberships revoked. I want their fraudulent credit lines completely severed. I want their precious elite Atlanta reputation ground into absolute microscopic dust. They wanted to permanently disown me. I am going to legally and financially erase them from the face of the earth right now. Dr. Jenkins discharged me 3 days later with strict orders to rest, but rest was a luxury I simply refused to indulge. I bypassed my modest suburban apartment entirely and directed my private security detail to transport me to a secure, heavily fortified penthouse suite overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. This was one of several classified corporate properties I maintained specifically for high-level crisis management. The sprawling, minimalist space was instantly converted into a high-tech war room. Marcus and my elite team of forensic accountants, cybersecurity experts, and ruthless corporate investigators arrived within the hour. We set up heavily encrypted servers, massive holographic displays, and secure communication channels. My cracked ribs throbbed with every breath, and my head still carried a dull, rhythmic ache from the severe concussion. But the pure adrenaline pumping through my veins completely masked the physical pain. I stood before the sweeping floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city where my family believed they ruled as untouchable royalty. They had spent decades building a shimmering, flawless facade of unearned wealth and arrogant superiority. Now I had a small army of the most brilliant, vicious minds in the country, aggressively tearing that fake facade apart, brick by miserable brick. I ordered my financial team to strip Jamal and Chloe of their absolute last remaining shreds of privacy. I did not just want to know about the mega development sinkhole. I wanted to see the exact microscopic details of their daily spending habits, their hidden offshore accounts, and every single miserable lie they had told to maintain their fake Atlanta aristocracy. Marcus and his team descended upon Jamal's financial records like starving vultures. They hacked through his shell companies, bypassed his poorly constructed corporate firewalls, and exposed a financial reality that was absolutely staggering in its sheer, unadulterated incompetence. Jamal was not just struggling to secure funding for his new luxury development in Buckhead. He was completely, catastrophically broke. His supposedly booming real estate empire was actually a massive tangled web of heavily defaulted loans, maxed out corporate credit lines, and incredibly desperate short-term promissory notes. He had been aggressively playing a highly illegal game of financial musical chairs, frantically using funds from new investors to quietly pay off the furious old ones. It was a classic textbook Ponzi scheme, and the entire structure was teetering right on the absolute brink of a spectacular, explosive collapse. He did not possess a single dime of actual liquid capital. The bespoke suits, the flashy luxury cars, the endless stream of expensive social media posts were all financed through aggressive credit card fraud and relentless predatory borrowing. He had completely drained the Vanguard investor funds to maintain his personal lifestyle, leaving the actual construction accounts utterly empty. The most devastating revelation, however, was how Jamal had managed to secure his most recent round of desperate funding just to keep the lights on at his fake corporate headquarters. My lead forensic accountant pulled up a highly classified banking document on the main holographic display, shaking her head in pure professional disbelief. Jamal had run completely out of conventional borrowing options. Traditional banks had blacklisted him entirely months ago, so he had turned to his incredibly gullible, completely devoted father-in-law. Desmond had willingly and secretly signed over the deed to the family estate. Jamal had completely remortgaged Brenda and Desmond's massive, beloved dream house in the most exclusive country club neighborhood in Atlanta. He took out an incredibly predatory high-interest secondary loan against their property, extracting every single drop of equity they had spent their entire lives building. And the most beautiful, darkly hilarious part of this specific discovery was that Brenda clearly had absolutely no idea. The loan documents required both signatures, but the forensic team quickly proved that Jamal had blatantly forged Brenda's name with Desmond's quiet, desperate complicity. My father had risked everything to protect the fake prestige of his golden son-in-law, fully believing Jamal's aggressive promises of an imminent massive return on the investment. Now they were effectively penniless. The moment the bank called in that massive loan, Brenda and Desmond would be violently evicted from their pristine mansion. They would lose their country club status, their wealthy friends, and their entire identity in a single afternoon. While Jamal's financial crimes were rooted in sheer, desperate arrogance, Chloe's dirt was significantly more sinister and breathtakingly evil. My cybersecurity team intercepted her personal banking records, her encrypted messages, and the administrative ledgers for the prestigious pediatric charity she supposedly championed. Chloe spent her days attending lavish luncheons, smiling brightly for the local society magazines, and posing as a deeply compassionate philanthropist, dedicating her life to underprivileged children. She frequently hosted massive fundraising galas, collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars from wealthy Atlanta socialites. The accounting data proved without a single shadow of a doubt that the vast majority of those charitable donations never actually reached any children. Chloe had systematically set up an intricate series of phantom vendor accounts and fake consulting fees. She had been aggressively and continuously funneling massive amounts of money directly from the children's charity straight into her own private offshore bank accounts. That money funded her weekly spa appointments, her extensive collection of designer handbags, her first-class vacations, and her pristine cream-colored pantsuits. She was literally stealing food, medicine, and educational supplies from vulnerable children to finance her fake, glamorous social media aesthetic. The sheer depravity of her actions was staggering. She had stood in my hospital room, demanding I drop the police charges, acting like a delicate, traumatized victim while she was actively operating as a ruthless, heartless criminal. The federal wire fraud and embezzlement charges alone would carry a mandatory minimum sentence that would ensure she spent the best years of her life wearing a bright orange jumpsuit instead of designer silk. With the financial and criminal traps perfectly assembled, there was only one final crucial piece of evidence required to complete the total annihilation of my toxic family. I needed the undeniable ironclad proof of what had actually happened out there in the scorching Sedona desert. Jamal genuinely believed he had stolen my only copy of the environmental survey data. He thought the heavy physical hard drive Chloe had snatched from my survival pack contained everything. He had absolutely no idea that I never relied on single physical storage devices for high-level corporate espionage operations. My chief technology officer arrived at the penthouse command center carrying a small, sleek silver briefcase. He placed it carefully on the glass conference table and opened it to reveal my automated micro-drone. The rescue team had recovered the small damaged device near the crash site and returned it to my security detail. It looked battered, covered in thick red desert dust, and severely scratched from the intense winds of the violent sandstorm. But the reinforced, military-grade internal memory core was completely intact and entirely pristine. My tech team quickly extracted the core, bypassed the complex biometric security locks, and pulled up the primary video files onto the massive screen. The drone had been programmed to continuously track my exact movements and record everything in stunning ultra-high-definition 4K resolution. The entire room fell into a dead, suffocating silence as the video began to play. We watched the brutal storm hit. We watched my violent fall down the rocky embankment. The camera angle was absolutely perfect, hovering just a few feet above the chaotic scene. Then Chloe's expensive rented vehicle pulled into the frame. The 4K video captured every single horrifying detail with terrifying clarity. It showed Chloe stepping out of the air-conditioned car. It captured her looking directly down at my bleeding, unconscious body. There was absolutely no panic in her eyes. There was no confusion, no fear, and absolutely no sisterly concern. There was only cold, calculated, and malicious intent. The drone's highly advanced directional microphones had easily isolated the audio, perfectly filtering out the roaring sound of the heavy wind. The crystal-clear audio filled the penthouse war room. We clearly heard Chloe aggressively tearing into my heavy survival backpack. We distinctly heard the loud, specific zip of the pocket's opening. We watched her deliberately unclip the hard drive, my emergency satellite radio, and my heavy water canteen. Then her sharp, unmistakable voice rang out through the speakers, dripping with absolute poison and pure, unapologetic hatred. I heard her say exactly what she had whispered to me before leaving me to die in the dirt. The camera captured her tossing my water bottle onto the passenger seat, slamming the car door shut, and speeding away into the thick dust, leaving me completely defenseless and bleeding out in the brutal heat. The ultimate weapon was officially locked and loaded. I smiled darkly at the frozen digital image of her speeding car. Their pathetic reign of terror was finally approaching its devastating, highly public, and undeniable conclusion. Exactly 2 weeks passed in a heavy, suffocating, and highly weaponized silence. I had successfully discharged myself from the sterile confines of the medical facility, leaving the harsh desert sun far behind me. I flew back to Atlanta, under the strict, uncompromising protection of my private corporate security detail, bypassing the crowded commercial airports entirely in favor of a private airstrip. I absolutely did not return to the modest, deliberately unassuming suburban apartment that my family believed I still occupied. Instead, I established my permanent base of operations inside my heavily fortified, ultra-luxurious, multi-level penthouse located squarely in the very heart of the bustling Atlanta financial district. From this staggering high-altitude vantage point, completely isolated from their toxic interference and daily manipulation, I operated my massive shadow empire. I watched the intricate, highly fraudulent gears of Jamal's crumbling real estate operation slowly grind forward. He was acting like a newly crowned king who had just conquered the entire world, utterly blind to the federal crosshairs locked directly onto his chest. The local business news stations were running continuous, overly flattering segments about his upcoming Buckhead luxury mega development. They called him a brilliant visionary. They called him the definitive future of Atlanta elite luxury living. He paraded proudly across my television screen, wearing his expensive bespoke suits, flashing his bright, empty smile, entirely convinced that his stolen hard drive contained the perfect doctored environmental data he desperately needed to forge his municipal safety permits. The physical catalyst for his imminent spectacular destruction arrived on a crisp, completely cloudless Tuesday morning. My executive assistant walked into the penthouse dining room, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor, carrying a thick, incredibly pretentious envelope made of heavy, textured cream cardstock. It was sealed with a thick dollop of crimson wax and stamped with a gaudy, oversized crest that screamed of artificial prestige. I sliced the thick paper open with a sleek silver letter opener and pulled out a massive, heavy gold foil invitation. The metallic lettering glittered obnoxiously under the modern crystal chandelier lights. It was an exclusive, highly restricted, and aggressively sought-after invitation to the prestigious Atlanta Excellence Gala. This was not just a regular high-society charity dinner or a standard corporate mixer. It was the absolute premier financial networking event of the entire decade, heavily restricted to the wealthiest political figures, elite investment bankers, and powerful international real estate tycoons operating in the southeastern United States. It was exactly the kind of highly exclusive, heavily guarded room where billions of dollars changed hands over clinking crystal champagne flutes and whispered backdoor agreements. Jamal had somehow managed to manipulate his way into securing the highly coveted keynote presentation slot for the evening. He was going to stand up in front of the most powerful, influential billionaires in the state of Georgia and aggressively pitch his fraudulent Buckhead luxury mega development. He was going to ask them for hundreds of millions of dollars in secondary funding to keep his massive, deeply illegal Ponzi scheme from instantly collapsing into a disastrous sinkhole. He desperately needed this gala to validate his entire fake existence. The invitation had been officially addressed to me, using my legal name forwarded directly through the mundane shell corporation that flawlessly managed my modest surveyor cover identity. It was a standard automated courtesy invite sent to all municipal contractors tangentially related to the massive construction project. They had absolutely no idea they had just handed a VIP entry pass to the very architect of their absolute doom. I was still holding the heavy gold foil card tracing the embossed lettering with my thumb when my secondary burner phone suddenly illuminated across the glass dining table. The dark screen flashed brightly with a new aggressive notification from the toxic family group chat. I had intentionally kept that specific communication line open solely for the purpose of monitoring their escalating, unchecked arrogance. I tapped the screen and opened the messaging application. It was a direct, highly vicious text from Brenda, and her words dripped with the exact brand of suffocating, condescending venom I had come to expect from her after 30 years of psychological abuse. We just saw that an automated guest invitation to the Atlanta Excellence Gala was accidentally sent to your tragic little apartment by mistake, Brenda wrote, adding a highly dramatic rolling eyes emoji for maximum condescension. Do not even think about showing up and embarrassing us tonight, Nia. This is a strictly black tie, ultra-exclusive society event for serious wealthy people. You do not have the wardrobe, the social grace, or the professional standing to be anywhere near that room. Jamal is personally pitching the Buckhead mega development to the Vanguard executives and international billionaires. He is officially securing our millions tonight. Stay home, watch television, and keep your jealous, bitter, poverty-stricken energy far away from our ultimate family victory. Desmond quickly chimed into the chat right beneath her vicious message, eager to pile on the emotional manipulation. Your mother is absolutely correct, Nia. He typed his words practically radiating fake pompous authority and unearned superiority. This entire night is exclusively about securing Chloe and Jamal's permanent financial legacy. Do not attempt to ruin this incredible milestone with your pathetic, low-level surveyor complaints or your hysterical drama. You signed the liability waiver in the hospital. You took the janitorial job offer. Know your place, stay out of our way, and be grateful we have not completely destroyed you yet. Then the final completely predictable blow arrived from Chloe. She sent a highly filtered, heavily edited selfie, showing her standing inside an exclusive luxury designer boutique, holding up an outrageously expensive sequined evening gown that cost more than most people made in a year. Oops, sorry, you absolutely cannot afford to dress like this, Sister Chloe mocked, adding a string of laughing and champagne glass emojis. Have a super fun night scrubbing floors in your janitor uniform while Jamal and I officially become Atlanta royalty. Try not to cry too hard. I stared at the illuminated screen of the burner phone, feeling a sharp, cold wave of pure predatory satisfaction wash over my entire body. A slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. They were so incredibly, blindly confident in their fake superiority. They truly, genuinely believed I was sitting in a dingy, cramped suburban living room, weeping over their vicious insults and feeling thoroughly humiliated by my own supposed poverty. They genuinely thought I was a broken, defeated woman who had completely surrendered to their ruthless extortion and physical abuse. I did not type a single word in response to their pathetic group chat. I did not need to engage in their petty, desperate digital squabbles. Let them bask in their delusional grandiosity for a few more hours. Let Brenda spray her hair into a rigid, immovable helmet of fake perfection. Let Desmond polish his cheap gold watch and practice his pompous handshake. Let Chloe squeeze herself into a glamorous gown paid for entirely by stolen children's charity funds. Let Jamal nervously rehearse his fraudulent, completely fabricated geological pitch in the mirror. They had specifically ordered me to stay away so I would not embarrass them in front of their wealthy peers. They had absolutely no idea that their absolute worst, most catastrophic nightmare was already getting meticulously dressed for the party. I locked the burner phone, set it gently on the table, and walked slowly toward the sprawling master bedroom suite. The long, frustrating time for hiding in the dark shadows was officially over. Tonight I was going to violently tear off the mask of the humble surveyor and show them exactly who they had been abusing, underestimating, and betraying for the past 3 decades. My personal styling team had arrived early that morning, bringing a curated selection of the most exclusive custom-tailored garments available in the entire world. I bypassed the standard off-the-rack department store dresses and walked directly toward a stunning, jaw-dropping piece of actual Parisian haute couture. It was a masterpiece of aggressive, breathtaking elegance. The gown was a deep, mesmerizing shade of midnight blue silk that shifted and gleamed like a dark, dangerous ocean current under the recessed penthouse lighting. It featured a dangerously plunging neckline, a completely backless design that highlighted my posture, and a dramatic sweeping train that commanded absolute, uncompromising attention. The heavy fabric clung to my curves with flawless, structured precision, projecting an aura of immense, untouchable power and staggering, unimaginable wealth. It was a dress designed specifically for a woman who owned the entire room the very second she walked through the double doors. I slipped the luxurious silk over my shoulders, feeling the cool, heavy material settle perfectly against my skin. My celebrity makeup artist applied a sharp, striking, and incredibly fierce look, emphasizing my high cheekbones and painting my lips a deep, intimidating matte crimson. My hair was styled in sleek, cascading waves that framed my face with absolute geometric perfection. I looked completely unrecognizable from the dusty, bleeding, and broken woman they had cruelly left to die in the brutal desert heat. I did not look like a survivor. I looked like a billionaire apex predator. I walked over to the brightly lit marble vanity and opened a heavy velvet jewelry box. I completely bypassed the delicate, unassuming pearls and deliberately selected a heavy, completely authentic, custom-designed diamond choker that literally cost more than Jamal's entire fake real estate portfolio. The brilliant, flawlessly cut stones caught the ambient light, throwing sharp, dazzling rainbows across the quiet, luxurious room. I fastened the platinum clasp securely around my neck, the cold, heavy weight of the diamonds serving as a constant physical reminder of my true status and undeniable power. Finally, I reached for my evening bag. It was a small, rigidly structured clutch, heavily encrusted with hundreds of flawless, glittering black diamonds. I popped the delicate platinum clasp open. Sitting right next to my heavy black metal credit cards and my favorite shade of crimson lipstick was a tiny, sleek, perfectly polished silver thumb drive. It was small, incredibly unassuming, and absolutely, profoundly lethal. That tiny piece of metal contained the unedited, raw 4K drone footage retrieved by my technical team. It contained the crystal clear high-definition video of Chloe actively stealing my water aggressively, snatching my emergency satellite radio, and speeding away in a cloud of red dust. It featured the perfectly isolated, undeniable audio of her intentionally leaving me to die laughing as she condemned her own sister. It also contained the complete, highly classified, true geological scan of the Buckhead sinkhole, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that Jamal's mega development was a deadly fraudulent scam designed to rob investors. And finally, it held the meticulously gathered financial records absolutely exposing Chloe's horrific systematic embezzlement of the pediatric charity funds. That tiny silver thumb drive was a digital guillotine, and I was about to drop the heavy razor-sharp blade directly onto their exposed necks in front of the absolute most powerful, influential people in the entire state of Georgia. I slipped the drive securely into the diamond-encrusted clutch, making sure it rested perfectly beside my phone, and snapped the heavy clasp shut with a sharp, incredibly satisfying metallic click. I turned slowly to look at myself in the massive full-length mirror one last time. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was not a struggling surveyor, and she was certainly not the pathetic family scapegoat Brenda and Desmond had relentlessly tortured for years. She was the undisputed, untouchable billionaire CEO of Teradata Analytics. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile, my crimson lips parting to reveal a predator's absolute certainty. The trap was perfectly laid. The bait was taken. I was completely, utterly ready for war. My private armored limousine glided seamlessly through the humid evening air, pulling up to the brightly lit valet stand of the most opulent five-star hotel in the ultra-wealthy district of Buckhead. The massive, towering crystal glass doors of the grand entrance practically radiated an intimidating aura of exclusionary prestige. I stepped out of the heavy vehicle, my custom silver stiletto heels clicking sharply against the pristine, polished granite pavement. My private corporate security detail melted invisibly into the dark shadows of the surrounding manicured courtyards, maintaining a flawless, highly classified perimeter around the entire building. I handed my embossed gold foil invitation to the impeccably dressed concierge standing at the entrance. He glanced down at the thick cardstock, took one single look at my custom midnight blue silk gown and my blinding multi-million-dollar diamond choker, and immediately bowed his head in profound, unquestioning respect. He swiftly unhooked the heavy velvet rope, granting me unrestricted access to the most elite gathering in the entire state of Georgia. I walked slowly into the massive main ballroom and instantly absorbed the staggering, overwhelming display of concentrated wealth. The massive space was dripping in absolute, unapologetic extravagance. Enormous cascading crystal chandeliers hung heavily from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, rich golden glow over the immaculate, towering floral arrangements decorating every single linen-draped table. The black elite of Atlanta moved fluidly and confidently through the room, sipping vintage champagne from delicate crystal flutes and exchanging quiet, highly influential pleasantries. These were the established political heavyweights, the aggressive international hedge fund managers, and the untouchable corporate titans who controlled the financial heartbeat of the entire southeastern seaboard. The conditioned air was thick with the scent of expensive designer perfumes and the steady hum of high-stakes networking. It was a room where fortunes were created, manipulated, and instantly destroyed with a single handshake. I lingered quietly near the upper mezzanine balcony, remaining completely cloaked in the soft shadows of a massive marble pillar. From this elevated vantage point, I possessed a perfect, completely unobstructed view of the entire sparkling ballroom floor below. It did not take long to spot my targets. My toxic, fraudulent family was completely in their element, aggressively working the crowded room like ravenous predators at a lavish corporate buffet. Chloe and Jamal were standing prominently near the center of the ballroom, acting exactly like freshly crowned royalty holding a highly exclusive court. Jamal wore a sharply tailored, incredibly expensive tuxedo, a fake charming smile plastered permanently across his face as he aggressively shook hands with a tight circle of older, distinguished-looking investment bankers. He leaned in close, speaking with animated, confident gestures, undoubtedly laying the deceptive groundwork for his completely fraudulent Buckhead luxury mega-development pitch. He looked exactly like a man who firmly believed he was about to single-handedly conquer the financial world, entirely oblivious to the catastrophic federal investigation currently tightening like a steel wire around his throat. Chloe stood dutifully by, his side clutching her crystal champagne flute filled with liquid bought by stolen charity funds. She wore the outrageously expensive, heavily sequined evening gown she had maliciously taunted me with earlier that very afternoon. She laughed a high, musical, and incredibly fake laugh, gently touching the arms of the wealthy executives' wives and completely soaking in their polite, entirely superficial admiration. She was the absolute picture of philanthropic high society grace, perfectly hiding a dark, miserable, and incredibly greedy soul behind a flawless mask of stolen designer silk and expertly applied makeup. A few yards away, Brenda and Desmond were aggressively and shamelessly cornering absolutely anyone who accidentally made unfortunate eye contact with them. My mother was holding a small porcelain plate of delicate hors d'oeuvres, bragging obnoxiously and loudly to a highly respected local city councilwoman. I could easily read her exaggerated lip movements and her arrogant posture from completely across the massive room. She was undoubtedly boasting endlessly about Jamal's incredible visionary genius and Chloe's supposedly selfless, tireless charitable endeavors. Desmond puffed out his chest, repeatedly nodding along with profound, unearned self-importance, desperately trying to project the intimidating image of a wealthy, influential family patriarch. They looked so incredibly small, so desperately eager in their frantic pursuit of validation from a room full of people who genuinely did not care about their existence. They were completely blinded by their own toxic, all-consuming vanity, entirely unaware that the very foundation of their elite status was a rotting, highly unstable sinkhole of lies, vicious extortion, and massive federal financial fraud. The time for passive observation was officially over. I stepped out from behind the heavy marble pillar and walked slowly with extreme precision toward the top of the grand sweeping staircase that descended directly into the exact center of the main ballroom. I paused deliberately at the very top step, allowing the brilliant, highly focused light of the central overhead crystal chandelier to wash over me completely. The heavy midnight blue silk of my custom haute couture gown gleamed like a dark, highly dangerous weapon. The massive, custom-designed platinum and diamond choker resting heavily around my neck caught the intense light, throwing blinding razor-sharp rainbows across the upper mezzanine walls and drawing immediate attention. I took a slow, highly calculated breath, squared my shoulders, tightened my grip on the diamond-encrusted clutch, and began my descent. I moved down the wide, plushly carpeted stairs with a slow, predatory, and incredibly fluid grace. I did not rush. I commanded the massive echoing space with every single deliberate step. My silver stiletto heels clicked rhythmically and sharply against the polished marble edging of the grand staircase, a sharp, commanding sound that sliced violently through the low hum of the ballroom chatter. Someone standing near the bottom of the stairs looked up and suddenly stopped talking mid-sentence. Then the elegantly dressed person next to them turned, looked up, and completely froze. The reaction rippled outward like a massive, unstoppable tidal wave of pure, unadulterated shock. The lively conversation nearest the staircase abruptly died. The heavy silence spread rapidly across the sprawling ballroom, consuming table after table, wealthy group after wealthy group. Within mere seconds, the entire Atlanta Excellence Gala fell into a dead, suffocating, and highly profound silence. Hundreds of the absolute most powerful, influential people in the entire city completely stopped sipping their expensive vintage champagne. They entirely ceased their high-stakes networking. They all turned their heads in absolute unison and stared directly up at the grand staircase, utterly captivated, deeply confused, and entirely mesmerized by the unknown, heavily jeweled woman descending like an absolute untouchable and highly intimidating queen. I kept my chin perfectly level, my eyes scanning the massive crowd with a cold, terrifying, and highly practiced authority. I could feel the immense weight of their collective gaze, the intense curiosity, and the silent respect instantly demanded by my undeniable presentation of absolute power. I was no longer the invisible, pathetic surveyor they could easily dismiss. I was the absolute storm, and I had finally officially arrived. My cold eyes locked directly onto my family. They were standing near the main cocktail bar, completely frozen in absolute horrifying public shock. Jamal's fake, highly charming smile had entirely melted off his face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated, and extremely frantic panic. His jaw literally dropped, his eyes wide and terrified as he stared up at the grand staircase. Chloe completely lost feeling in her fingers and dropped her champagne flute. The delicate crystal shattered loudly against the polished marble floor. Brenda aggressively slapped a perfectly manicured hand over her open mouth, her eyes bulging with pure visible horror, while Desmond looked like he was going to have a massive heart attack right there in his rented tuxedo. I finally reached the absolute bottom of the grand staircase, stepping smoothly and confidently onto the main ballroom floor. The massive crowd of elite billionaires and powerful politicians instinctively parted instantly, creating a wide, highly respectful, and completely clear path for me. Before I could even take 10 steps into the elite crowd, the frantic, heavily panicked scrambling began. Jamal, Chloe, Brenda, and Desmond violently pushed their way through the elegantly dressed, highly confused guests. They aggressively converged on me, violently grabbing my elbows and shoving me away from the bright, heavily populated center of the ballroom, dragging me into a dark alcove near the rear service corridors. They needed to hide this catastrophic anomaly from the vanguard investors. The second we were hidden in the shadows, Chloe lunged forward. "Did you rent that dress?" she hissed. "Get out of here before you ruin Jamal's pitch to the vanguard investors." I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch. I slowly raised my right hand, reaching out to gently brush a microscopic speck of dust off Jamal's lapel. I looked him dead in the eyes, smiling coldly. "I wouldn't miss this pitch for the world," I whispered. I stepped back, allowing the sheer proximity of my custom diamonds to blind their greedy eyes. Jamal recoiled as if I had burned him. Brenda opened her mouth to screech another empty threat, but the booming voice of the gala master of ceremonies echoed through the massive ballroom speakers, interrupting her perfectly. The time had arrived. The master of ceremonies enthusiastically announced the keynote presentation for the highly anticipated Buckhead luxury mega development. Jamal physically jumped at the sound of his own name. Panic violently wrestled with his desperate, all-consuming ego. He shot me one final, terrifyingly frantic glare before forcefully adjusting his silk tie and turning away. He had to perform. He had millions of dollars riding on this exact moment, and he genuinely believed his stolen fake hard drive was safely secured with the audiovisual team. He marched out of the dimly lit alcove, leaving Brenda, Desmond, and Chloe staring at me with a sickening mixture of rage and profound confusion. I did not give them another second of my time. I simply turned my back and glided effortlessly out of the shadows, re-entering the magnificent, glittering expanse of the main ballroom. I claimed a highly visible strategic position directly in the center of the room, standing beside a towering floral arrangement of white orchids. I wanted a flawless, unobstructed view of the colossal 50-foot LED screen dominating the main stage. I wanted an equally perfect view of my family when the digital trap completely snapped shut. Jamal practically sprinted up the carpeted stairs to the illuminated stage. He grabbed the microphone with a practiced, arrogant ease, flashing his blinding, charismatic smile at the sea of billionaires, venture capitalists, and elite politicians. The heavy, warm spotlight hit him, and he instantly transformed into the ultimate corporate savior. He welcomed the prestigious crowd with a smooth, heavily rehearsed charm, aggressively thanking the Vanguard investors sitting in the front row for their continued unwavering financial trust. He spoke grandly and passionately about his vision for Atlanta. He painted a completely fabricated, glittering picture of absolute structural perfection. He bragged endlessly about the groundbreaking architectural safety measures, the elite luxury amenities, and the supposed unyielding integrity of his entire development firm. He literally looked the wealthiest people in the state directly in the eyes and promised them absolute perfection, completely unaware that he was standing on a massive metaphorical sinkhole of his own making. The sheer audacity of his lies was almost impressive. He paced across the wide stage, gesturing expansively with his hands, expertly working the room into a state of eager anticipation. He promised unparalleled returns on their massive investments. He spoke of the meticulous, incredibly rigorous environmental and geological surveys his team had supposedly conducted, assuring everyone in the room that the bedrock beneath their future luxury empire was solid, safe, and completely indestructible. Every single word was a deliberate, calculated fraud, and he delivered the lies with the polished grace of a seasoned con artist. I watched him raise his right hand, clutching a small, sleek black presentation remote. He announced that he wanted to show the distinguished guests a brief, exclusive promotional video. He promised this video would highlight the stunning architectural renderings and the unparalleled safety features of his crown jewel project. He pointed the remote directly at the audiovisual booth located high above the ballroom floor. He pressed the button with a theatrical flourish, flashing that fake brilliant smile one last time. He expected a soaring, orchestral soundtrack and sweeping computer-generated images of luxury penthouses. He expected absolute applause and immediate massive financial investments. I slowly lifted my chin and directed my gaze up toward the darkened glass-enclosed AV booth. I gave a single incredibly subtle nod. The audiovisual technician operating the entire gala was not an employee of the hotel. He was a highly trained elite cyber operative directly employed by Teradata Analytics. My massive shadow empire had secretly purchased the primary event production company running this entire gala 3 days ago. I completely owned the screens, the speakers, and the servers. The giant 50-foot LED screen flickered violently. The bright, sterile corporate logo of Jamal's real estate firm completely vanished. The massive ballroom speakers emitted a low, heavy electronic hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The sudden jarring sound immediately silenced the polite murmurs of the elite crowd. Hundreds of wealthy faces turned upward in total confusion. Instead of a polished fake real estate promotional video, the massive screen exploded with stark, incredibly bright, ultra-high-definition 4K video footage. The scene was not a luxury high-rise in Buckhead. It was the brutal, unforgiving, and violently red landscape of the Sedona desert. The camera angle was sweeping and incredibly steady, captured perfectly by my automated military-grade micro-drone. The footage was breathtakingly clear, showcasing the violent, swirling aftermath of the massive sandstorm. The entire ballroom let out a collective gasp as the massive screen displayed the horrifying wreckage of my all-terrain vehicle crushed violently against the jagged canyon rocks. The ultra-high-definition camera slowly zoomed in, revealing my battered, bleeding, and unconscious body slumped heavily in the thick red dirt. The elite crowd recoiled in genuine shock. The silence in the room became thick, heavy, and absolutely suffocating. Then the true horror officially began. A sleek, expensive rented SUV sped into the frame, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. The vehicle stopped abruptly, just a few feet away from my broken body. The driver's side door swung open. The drone camera captured the scene with immaculate, terrifying precision. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the Vanguard investors in the front row as a 20-foot-tall crystal-clear image of Chloe stepped out of the vehicle on the massive screen. She was wearing her pristine, expensive desert hiking outfit, looking entirely untouched by the violent storm. The drone's highly advanced directional microphones flawlessly eliminated the background wind, isolating the audio with absolute chilling clarity. Every single breath, every single footstep echoed heavily through the massive state-of-the-art surround sound system. The entire room watched in paralyzed horror as 20-foot-tall Chloe approached my bleeding, unconscious form. There was no hesitation in her movements. There was absolutely no panic or sisterly concern. The high-definition video showed her standing directly over me, looking down with cold, calculating detachment. She aggressively reached down and grabbed my heavy survival backpack. The sharp, tearing sound of the thick zippers opening echoed violently across the silent ballroom. The elite guests watched completely mesmerized by the sheer cruelty unfolding on the massive screen, as Chloe systematically and ruthlessly looted my emergency supplies. She roughly unclipped the heavy life-saving water canteen. She forcefully yanked the emergency satellite radio from its secure harness. She aggressively dug into the secondary pouch and extracted the physical hard drive, clutching it tightly in her manicured hand. The absolute silence in the grand ballroom was deafening. Every single billionaire, politician, and socialite was completely frozen, their eyes glued to the towering display of pure, unadulterated evil. They were watching a prominent, supposedly compassionate Atlanta philanthropist actively rob a bleeding, defenseless woman in the middle of a lethal desert wasteland. Then the drone's isolated audio feed broadcast her voice. The words blasted through the massive surround sound speakers, ringing out with a sharp, vicious, and incredibly cruel clarity that bounced violently off the crystal chandeliers. "Find your own way back, you liability 20 foot tall," Chloe sneered aggressively on the giant screen, her voice dripping with absolute poison and pure, unabashed malice. The sound was deafening, filling every single corner of the opulent space with her undeniable guilt. The massive video showed her turning her back on my bleeding body. It showed her casually tossing my life-saving water canteen directly onto the passenger seat of her air-conditioned vehicle. It captured the heavy slam of the car door and showed the SUV speeding away into the thick red dust, intentionally leaving me completely alone to die in the brutal, suffocating heat. The video abruptly cut to black, leaving the massive 50-foot LED screen completely dark. The sudden total silence that crashed down upon the Atlanta Excellence Gala was absolute and profoundly terrifying. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. No one moved. No one dared to breathe. Hundreds of the most powerful people in the state stood completely paralyzed, their expensive champagne flutes suspended halfway to their mouths. Jamal stood frozen behind the transparent acrylic podium, his arms still extended toward the dark screen, the useless remote clutched tightly in his sweating hand. Across the room, Chloe stood entirely immobilized. Her eyes bulged with sheer, uncompromising terror as she stared upward. Her manicured fingers went completely numb. The heavy crystal champagne glass slipped directly through her grip, plummeting toward the polished marble floor. It hit the ground with a very sharp, loud, violent, echoing crash. The shattering of the delicate crystal champagne glass echoed like a violent gunshot through the paralyzing, suffocating silence of the grand ballroom. The razor-sharp fragments scattered wildly across the polished marble, but not a single guest dared to look down at the mess. Hundreds of the absolute most elite financial minds in the southeastern United States kept their horrified, unblinking eyes locked on the massive dark screen, before slowly shifting their collective, highly judgmental gaze toward the terrified woman standing near the bar. Chloe looked exactly as though she had been physically struck by a massive bolt of lightning. The blood had entirely drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving behind a stark, ghostly pallor that completely destroyed her carefully crafted high society facade. She took a clumsy, highly uncoordinated step backward, her expensive silver heels slipping slightly on the spilled champagne, violently bumping into Brenda. My mother did not even try to reach out and steady her absolute favorite daughter. Brenda was completely rigid, her heavily jeweled hands clutching her chest, as if her own heart had just stopped beating entirely. Desmond stared blankly into the opulent void, his pompous, unearned patriarch bravado evaporating into absolute pathetic nothingness. The wealthy wives and powerful executives who had been eagerly socializing with them just moments before now instinctively recoiled, taking large, deliberate steps away from my toxic family as if they were suddenly highly contagious. Up on the brilliantly lit main stage, the suffocating reality of total destruction finally crashed down heavily onto Jamal. His pristine, custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looked like a cheap, ill-fitting costume on a terrified little boy. He stared at the blank 50-foot LED screen with wide, uncomprehending eyes, his brain desperately struggling to process the catastrophic failure of his heavily orchestrated presentation. The ambient hum of the grand ballroom slowly began to return, mutating rapidly into a low, aggressive wave of furious whispering from the billionaire investors. They were absolute apex predators, and they smelled fresh, undeniable blood heavily in the water. The low, angry murmurs of the outraged investors violently snapped Jamal out of his frozen, panicked stupor. He spun around rapidly to face the elite crowd, his previous suave charisma entirely replaced by a feral, unhinged desperation. He gripped the edges of the transparent acrylic podium so incredibly hard, his knuckles turned stark white under the harsh stage lighting. He grabbed the microphone, his hands shaking uncontrollably, and leaned forward, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," Jamal screamed into the microphone, the loud, abrasive sound feeding back sharply through the expensive sound system and causing several guests to visibly wince. "Do not listen to this. Do not look at this. This is a complete fabrication. It is a malicious, highly sophisticated, deep-fake video." He gestured wildly toward the dark screen, sweat actively beading on his forehead and completely ruining his flawless, expensive grooming. "My firm is under a coordinated cyber attack. This is the absolute work of a deeply disturbed, mentally unstable, broke sister-in-law who has been relentlessly trying to extort my family for years." The heavy, oppressive silence of the ballroom absorbed his frantic, pathetic lies without a single drop of sympathy. The wealthy attendees were not foolish, gullible targets. They were ruthless, highly analytical financial titans who could instantly spot a drowning man violently grasping at non-existent straws. Jamal's voice grew even more hysterical, echoing off the massive crystal chandeliers as he desperately tried to rewrite the undeniable reality they had all just clearly witnessed. "She is a complete liability, a completely broke, bitter, pathetic woman who is incredibly jealous of our immense success. You have to believe me right now. The Buckhead mega development is completely secure. Our data is flawless. The Vanguard investments are entirely safe." Directly in the center of the prestigious front row, a tall, incredibly imposing figure slowly stood up from his velvet-draped chair. The furious, aggressive whispering immediately died down into absolute silence. The man was Arthur Pierce, the legendary billionaire head of Vanguard Investments. He was the undisputed kingmaker of Atlanta real estate, a man whose single signature could instantly authorize hundreds of millions of dollars in secondary funding. He adjusted his impeccably tailored suit jacket with absolute terrifying calm. Jamal saw him stand and practically gasped out loud in relief, a frantic, desperate smile rapidly returning to his heavily sweating face. "Mr. Pierce," Jamal cried out into the microphone, his voice practically begging for immediate salvation. "Mr. Pierce, thank you. Please assure these distinguished guests that Vanguard stands firmly behind our visionary project. Tell them this is just a ridiculous, desperate hoax created by a jealous relative." Arthur Pierce completely ignored the sweating, panicking man pleading on the stage. He did not even cast a single glance in Jamal's pathetic direction. Instead, the powerful billionaire turned his broad back to the acrylic podium and faced the absolute center of the grand ballroom. His sharp, highly intelligent eyes locked directly onto me. The elite crowd instinctively parted even further, rapidly expanding the wide, highly respectful, and completely clear path that separated me from the powerful Vanguard executive. The heavy, intimidating silence returned, pressing down firmly on the massive room with immense, undeniable weight. Arthur Pierce looked at my custom midnight blue silk gown, my blinding diamond choker, and my unwavering, cold, and calculated expression. Then, in front of the absolute wealthiest, most influential people in the entire state of Georgia, the billionaire kingmaker bowed his head in profound, unquestioning respect. "Madam CEO," Mr. Pierce said, his deep, resonant voice projecting clearly across the dead-silent ballroom. "Are these the forged documents your firm warned us about?" The collective gasp that erupted violently from the elite crowd was deafening. The sheer shock of the untouchable vanguard billionaire publicly bowing to me and addressing me with such profound, undeniable reverence sent a massive visible tremor through the entire room. In the dark alcove near the service corridor, Brenda let out a pathetic, high-pitched, strangled whimper. Desmond looked exactly as though he had stopped breathing entirely, his face turning a sickening shade of gray. Chloe simply stared at me, her mind completely shattered by the impossible, catastrophic reality unfolding directly in front of her. Up on the main stage, Jamal physically stumbled backward, his knees giving out slightly, as the absolute magnitude of his impending doom finally registered in his heavily panicking brain. I did not verbally respond to Mr. Pierce immediately. I merely gave him a slow, highly calculated, and incredibly sharp nod of confirmation. I gripped my diamond-encrusted evening bag securely and began to walk forward. I moved with deliberate, highly lethal grace, my custom silver stiletto heels clicking sharply and rhythmically against the polished marble floor as I made my way directly toward the brightly lit stage. The elite crowd watched my every single movement with absolute terrified fascination, completely mesmerized by the absolute display of my undeniable power. I ascended the carpeted stairs with perfect unyielding posture, the heavy silk train of my Parisian gown sweeping elegantly and dramatically behind me. I approached the transparent podium where Jamal was currently hyperventilating. He looked at me with wide, completely terrified eyes, absolutely paralyzed by my intimidating predatory presence. He was sweating profusely, his expensive tuxedo entirely ruined his fraudulent empire, actively crumbling into microscopic dust beneath his expensive leather shoes. I did not say a single word to him. I simply reached out with absolute authority and took the microphone directly out of his trembling, clammy hand. He relinquished it instantly without a single shred of resistance, stepping back into the dark shadows of the stage like a defeated, absolutely pathetic coward. I stepped up to the exact center of the podium, commanding the absolute undivided attention of every single billionaire politician and executive in the massive ballroom. I looked out over the sprawling sea of highly shocked faces, my expression completely cold, highly analytical, and absolutely uncompromising. "Good evening," I said, my calm, powerful voice echoing flawlessly through the crystal-clear sound system. "My name is Nia. I am not a broke, mentally unstable surveyor, and I am certainly not a financial liability." I paused deliberately, letting the heavy, undeniable truth settle over the completely captivated crowd. I am the sole founder, absolute owner, and undisputed CEO of Teradata Analytics. The very firm this panicking man just falsely claimed conducted his rigorous environmental surveys. A low, incredibly intense wave of horrified realization washed heavily over the elite investors. Furthermore, I continued, my voice slicing through the heavy, conditioned air like a razor-sharp blade, I am the primary, controlling shareholder of the private holding corporation that recently purchased the exact plot of land this fraudulent Buckhead mega development is currently attempting to break ground upon. I looked directly down at Mr. Pierce, who nodded grimly in total agreement. "The data presented to you tonight by Jamal is a complete, total, and deliberate fabrication. The raw, unedited, highly classified geological scans retrieved directly by my private technical team prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that the entire development site sits directly above a massive, highly unstable, and incredibly deadly subterranean sinkhole. Building upon that specific land would result in catastrophic structural failure and massive, undeniable loss of human life." I turned my head slowly, locking my cold, absolutely predatory gaze directly onto Jamal's sweating, thoroughly ruined face. "This man did not just attempt to steal your money tonight," I announced to the silent, furious room. "He stood on this stage in front of the most powerful investors in the country and knowingly presented forged, entirely fraudulent federal municipal safety permits to actively conceal a deadly geological disaster. He intentionally endangered thousands of innocent lives simply to line his own empty pockets. His massive, deeply illegal Ponzi scheme is officially over, and the federal authorities have already been heavily briefed on every single detail of his staggering corporate treason. The final echo of my accusation had barely faded into the heavy velvet drapes of the grand ballroom when the massive gold-leafed double doors at the main entrance violently burst open. The sheer force of the impact sent a jarring shockwave across the polished marble floor. A highly coordinated, heavily armed tactical unit of federal agents flooded into the opulent space. They moved with terrifying, flawless precision, their dark tactical gear striking a harsh, brutal contrast against the glittering sea of custom tuxedos and expensive evening gowns. The sharp, commanding voice of the lead federal agent cut through the suffocating silence, ordering the elite crowd to step back and remain completely still. Hundreds of the wealthiest, most influential billionaires and politicians in the state of Georgia instinctively scrambled out of the way, practically climbing over each other in their desperate rush to distance themselves from the unfolding catastrophe. The agents did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. They marched directly down the center aisle, their heavy combat boots pounding a relentless, deafening rhythm that signaled the absolute end of Jamal's fraudulent empire. The flashing red and blue lights from the dozens of police cruisers parked aggressively outside illuminated the towering crystal glass windows, casting long, erratic, and deeply unsettling shadows across the lavishly decorated tables. The intoxicating scent of expensive vintage champagne and exclusive designer perfume was instantly overpowered by the harsh metallic reality of impending justice. I stood completely motionless at the center of the transparent acrylic podium, my posture perfectly rigid, my expression entirely unreadable, as I watched the inescapable consequences of their greed finally crash down upon them. The trap had not just closed, it had locked permanently. Jamal physically recoiled as the lead federal agents forcefully ascended the carpeted steps of the main stage. His previous suave, untouchable corporate savior persona had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a pathetic, heavily sweating, and entirely broken man. He raised his trembling hands in a frantic, utterly useless gesture of surrender, desperately backing away until his expensive leather shoes hit the rigid edge of the presentation screen. He opened his mouth to formulate another web of frantic lies, but the lead agent aggressively grabbed his right shoulder, spinning him violently around and slamming him forcefully against the cold, hard surface of the stage wall. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around Jamal's wrists echoed loudly across the silent, captivated ballroom. The federal agent read him his rights in a booming, authoritative voice, loudly listing a staggering array of devastating charges: wire fraud, massive federal extortion, the knowing deliberate forgery of highly classified federal environmental documents, the intentional endangerment of human life. With every single devastating charge broadcast to the ultra-wealthy crowd, Jamal seemed to physically shrink his shoulders, collapsing his knees, buckling under the immense crushing weight of his absolute ruin. He pathetically begged the Vanguard investors for help, his voice cracking and whining, but the billionaire executives merely stared back with expressions of pure, unadulterated disgust. Arthur Pierce, the powerful kingmaker Jamal had desperately courted all evening, simply turned his head away in complete, uncompromising rejection. Jamal was roughly dragged down the stage stairs, his custom-tailored tuxedo hopelessly wrinkled, his reputation completely obliterated, and his entire fraudulent future firmly secured behind cold federal steel bars. While the federal agents expertly dismantled Jamal's completely fabricated real estate empire, a secondary squad of local police detectives flanked the dark alcove, where Chloe remained utterly paralyzed. She was still staring blankly at the shattered remains of her crystal champagne flute, her mind entirely incapable of processing the towering, undeniable footage of her own horrific desert cruelty. Two stern-faced female officers approached her swiftly, their expressions completely devoid of any sympathy. Chloe snapped out of her shocked stupor and instantly began to thrash and shriek completely, reverting to her toxic, spoiled, and heavily entitled nature. She violently kicked out, screaming hysterically about her ruined, outrageously expensive sequined haute couture evening gown and demanding they immediately recognize her elite philanthropic status. The detectives were completely unmoved by her pathetic high society temper tantrum. They grabbed her arms with absolute uncompromising force, twisting them sharply behind her back. The bright, highly unforgiving ballroom lighting caught the cold gleam of the handcuffs as they were locked securely over her delicate jewel-encrusted wrists. The lead detective leaned in close, ensuring her commanding voice carried directly to the surrounding crowd. She formally placed Chloe under immediate arrest for severe reckless endangerment, the massive, systematic grand larceny of pediatric charity funds, and the brutal, undeniable attempted manslaughter of her own sister. Chloe wailed loudly, a harsh grating and incredibly ugly sound that completely shattered her carefully maintained mask of philanthropic grace. She desperately looked toward the wealthy society wives she had spent the entire evening attempting to impress, begging them to intervene. Instead of offering any salvation, the elite women visibly recoiled in utter revulsion, gathering their heavy silk skirts and stepping away from her as she was humiliatingly marched across the grand ballroom floor. Brenda and Desmond watched the simultaneous highly public destruction of their two favorite children from the absolute fringes of the chaotic ballroom floor. They were entirely stripped of their pompous, unearned superiority, reduced to trembling, highly pathetic shells of their former arrogant selves. Brenda clutched her stiff, heavily hair-sprayed head, her face contorted in an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated panic, while Desmond stared vacantly ahead, completely unable to process the total collapse of their stolen legacy. Then, cutting sharply through the tense, highly charged atmosphere, both of their expensive smartphones pinged simultaneously. The notification tones rang out loudly, perfectly synchronized and impossibly sharp. Desmond reached into his rented tuxedo jacket, with visibly trembling fingers, his breathing shallow and rapid. Brenda snatched her phone from her designer clutch, her eyes frantically scanning the brightly illuminated digital screen. It was an automated, highly urgent, and completely irreversible alert from their primary banking institution. The notification detailed the immediate, total foreclosure of their massive, sprawling suburban mansion. Jamal, in his desperate, chaotic scramble to secure secondary funding for his fraudulent sinkhole development, had quietly and illegally used their lavish home as primary collateral for a series of highly toxic, heavily defaulted shadow mortgages. The bank had officially seized absolutely everything. Brenda let out a piercing, genuinely agonizing scream, her knees buckling completely as the staggering, crushing reality of total financial devastation hit her. She collapsed heavily onto the polished marble floor, her expensive jewelry clattering uselessly against the cold stone. Desmond simply dropped his phone, the device shattering upon impact, his arrogant posture entirely deflating as he realized they were instantly, completely and utterly destitute with absolutely nowhere left to hide. Their entire world had vanished into thin air. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Excellence Gala was now a sprawling, undeniable monument to my complete and absolute victory. The hundreds of incredibly powerful, ultra-wealthy attendees did not offer a single ounce of pity or comfort to the crying, thoroughly broken family, writhing pathetically on the floor. Instead, in a display of total unspoken unity, the entire elite crowd physically turned their backs. They formed a solid, impenetrable wall of custom tailoring and expensive silk, completely shutting out Brenda, Desmond, Chloe, and Jamal from the high society world they had so desperately and fraudulently attempted to conquer. The ultimate humiliating shunning was completely silent, yet it spoke with an incredibly deafening volume. The local police and federal tactical units forcefully hauled my screaming, completely ruined siblings through the massive crystal glass doors, throwing them roughly into the back of the waiting, heavily caged squad cars. Brenda remained sobbing hysterically on the marble, completely ignored by the passing billionaires, while Desmond stared blankly into the cold, empty void of his newly shattered reality. I remained standing at the center of the illuminated main stage, looking down at the spectacular, flawless wreckage of the people who had mercilessly tormented, abused, and betrayed me for my entire existence. I did not feel a single shred of remorse. I felt only the cold, sharp, and incredibly satisfying edge of pure, unadulterated justice. I smoothly picked up my black diamond-encrusted evening bag, gave Arthur Pierce one final, highly respectful nod of acknowledgement, and walked gracefully off the stage. I exited the grand ballroom surrounded by my elite, untouchable corporate security detail, leaving the toxic, rotting remnants of my former family behind in the dark, suffocating dust of their own complete and total destruction. They had tried to bury me in the desert, but they had completely forgotten that I was the one who controlled the absolute ground they walked upon. My magnificent revenge was officially complete. I stepped out into the warm, incredibly welcoming night air, breathed deeply, and smiled a genuine, perfectly peaceful smile. The absolute darkness of my past was gone forever, and my incredibly bright, untouchable future was finally truly beginning. Before I could even take a single step toward my waiting limousine, the heavy glass doors behind me burst open again. Brenda Desmond and a heavily handcuffed Chloe had violently shoved past the restraining arms of the local police detectives, stumbling frantically onto the pristine granite pavement. They threw themselves directly at my feet, their knees hitting the hard stone with a sickening, heavy thud. The elite corporate security detail instantly stepped forward to intercept them, but I raised my right hand, signaling my guards to stand down for just one more minute. I wanted to hear this. I wanted to witness their absolute final degradation. Brenda was completely sobbing, tears ruining her expensive makeup and streaking black mascara down her cheeks. She grabbed the hem of my midnight blue silk gown with her trembling hands, her fingers digging desperately into the luxurious fabric. She completely abandoned her arrogant matriarch persona, reverting to a pathetic, weeping mess. Desmond knelt beside her, his shoulders shaking, completely stripped of his pompous authority. Chloe fell forward, her diamond bracelets clinking sharply against her police-issued steel handcuffs, her face a portrait of utter, unadulterated terror. "Nia, please!" Brenda wailed, her voice cracking as she looked up at me with wide, frantic eyes. "You have millions. You have unimaginable power. You can stop all of this right now. Call off the federal agents. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding." Desmond aggressively nodded his head, his voice pleading and desperate. "We are your family. Nia, we took you in. We gave you a home when you had absolutely nothing. You owe us." Chloe thrashed against her restraints, sobbing hysterically. "I do not want to go to prison. I am not cut out for jail. Please, sister, I am begging you. We are your blood. Save us." I stared down at the three weeping, pathetic figures groveling in the dirt. They were using their classic, highly toxic, manipulative tactics, desperately trying to weaponize the very concept of family that they had ruthlessly exploited for over 3 decades. They genuinely expected the weak, obedient surveyor to suddenly resurface and shield them from the catastrophic consequences of their own horrific actions. I slowly reached into my structured black diamond-encrusted evening clutch. My fingers bypassed the sleek burner phone and closed around a heavily folded, extremely wrinkled piece of paper. I pulled it out and held it up under the bright valet lighting. It was the extorted, fraudulent liability contract they had violently forced me to sign in the sterile hospital room while I was still coughing up desert sand. I looked down into their desperate, pleading faces. I slowly opened my fingers and let the crumpled contract drop. It fluttered through the humid evening air and landed directly in the puddle of Brenda's tears, right at their trembling knees. "Family pulls you out of the sandstorm," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and unyielding as pure titanium. "They don't steal your water and leave you to choke on the dust. You aren't my family. You're just a bad investment I'm finally writing off." I gave my elite corporate security detail a single definitive nod. The heavily armed guards immediately moved in, ruthlessly pulling Brenda Desmond and Chloe off the pavement. The local police detectives rushed forward aggressively, taking custody of the screaming, thrashing family members. They were dragged kicking and wailing toward the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting squad cars. I did not look back. I stepped into my armored limousine, the heavy door shutting out their frantic screams forever. Exactly 6 months passed, and the absolute destruction of their fraudulent empire became a permanent, undeniable reality. The federal justice system moved with terrifying efficiency. Jamal was swiftly convicted on multiple counts of severe wire fraud, massive corporate extortion, and the intentional forgery of highly classified federal environmental documents. He was immediately stripped of his tailored suits and fake charm, permanently assigned a standard-issue khaki jumpsuit, and handed a mandatory 10-year federal prison sentence in a maximum security facility. There were no cameras, no luxury developments, and absolutely no high society galas in his bleak concrete future. Chloe faced an equally harsh, entirely public reckoning. The high-definition drone footage of her desert cruelty proved absolutely insurmountable in court. She avoided heavy prison time only through a highly restrictive, incredibly punishing plea deal that entirely bankrupted her. She was sentenced to 5 years of rigorous, highly supervised probation and thousands of hours of grueling community service. The former Atlanta high society elite was now permanently assigned to a municipal sanitation crew. She spent her days wearing a bright, incredibly unflattering neon orange safety vest, physically picking up discarded trash, and scraping foul debris off the sweltering sides of the interstate highways. The wealthy socialites she used to manipulate now drove past her in their luxury vehicles, entirely ignoring her existence. Brenda and Desmond lost absolutely everything in the massive, crushing wake of the bank foreclosures. Stripped of their stolen wealth, their luxury cars, and their unearned social status, they were violently expelled from their exclusive suburban bubble. They were forced to relocate to a cramped, severely run-down one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. They spent their miserable, isolated days bitterly arguing with each other in a dingy, dimly lit living room, completely surrounded by cheap, peeling wallpaper and the deafening noise of the nearby train tracks. They had absolutely no money, no influence, and no favored children left to financially extort. I stood perfectly still on the expansive open-air balcony of my ultra-luxurious multi-level financial district penthouse. The warm, gentle evening breeze swept softly across my face as I looked out over the sprawling, brilliantly illuminated Atlanta skyline. The magnificent city stretched out far before me like a massive, glittering ocean of infinite possibilities. I took a deep breath, completely thriving and entirely at peace, a powerful fade to black,